What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is a story where Issei was broken and hides his true self. What if Issei wasn't nearly what people portrayed him to be or assumed him to be? What if there was a much deeper person behind those amber pools that have grown so dull? Would you reach out and try to help a boy so dejected that he can't look you in the eye? But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations, and support the amazing author ChaosOTD for writing this story. Now, let's get into the story. It was your typical day in Kuo, around 3 days into the new school year of the newly co-ed campus. What was previously an all-girls school had changed the very year our brown-haired boy had reached the grade to go into high school, and unfortunately for him, his aspirations, his hopes and dreams of things going differently from middle school were going to crash and burn in the worst of ways. Though, if you were to ask him outright, he would just tell you this himself through a very quiet voice as those cold dead eyes just stared past you. Not that anyone would even reach out to him. Hell, even his parents had taken the side of the rumor mill rather baselessly, all due to an accusation of a few male students and 2 female students. He had fallen victim to none other than the perverted duo's scheme. They had set him up in the worst of ways, even though he was trying to fix the issue. He was caught by a peephole, clearly trying to cover it up with duct tape, wood and nails. But because one girl inside saw the figure moving outside of the opening, they automatically assumed the male was using it to spy on them, as Motohama had screamed at the top of his lungs that a new pervert had arrived. Much to the boy's chagrin and dismay. Not a single one of the girls had listened to him as they began assaulting him with bakken, something that could easily be classified as an attempt on his life under any circumstances if he took it to the courts. Only 2 had abstained themselves from the violent assault, 2 members of the kendo team being Kates and Murayama, as they were trying to stop the frenzied women to get the actual story out of the boy, even though their cries were straight up ignored by the rest. They knew he wasn't lying as they tried to report that hole earlier to the student council, only to be ignored themselves. That said, he was reprimanded by literally damn everyone on campus outside of those 2 girls, with no chance to plead his case nor defend himself. The student council suspended him on the spot with in-school suspension so they could monitor him, even though he had physical proof that he was trying to correct the issue. There was no mercy for the once bright-eyed boy. And to make matters worse, the delinquent duo actually came and beat the absolute hell out of him for snitching on them, getting them suspended, leaving the boy in a back alley behind the school genuinely bleeding, bruised and dazed. Out of the corner of his eye he could have swore he saw golden eyes peering out at him before he faded out of consciousness, only to wake up in a stretcher. His left arm had been broken in several places as the other of the pair had taken a pike to his arm. Fortunately for Issei, if you could call it that, all of this had been caught on a camera and submitted to the school for evidence, though it really didn't amount to much other than a longer suspension for the duo, even though it very much so should have led to instant expulsion. A regretful trend that the brunette was going to become used to hearing over and over. Later in that evening he was walking home from the hospital with a sling and cast on. His own parents hadn't even come to pick him up, leading to streams of tears running down his face. They had been called by the student council and, as everyone else had, believed the others instead of their own son. When he came home, struggling to open the door, he tried to go to his parents over this to have the cops involved, but they basically told him something along the lines of, "A boy should be able to fight better. We raised you to defend yourself. What was the point of those martial arts classes we paid for? It would have been better if we had a girl instead of a useless pervert." Words that further confirmed his thoughts towards his parents. They didn't give a damn what happened to him. That was the moment he truly had broken. To him, he realized 2 things in this life. A. It didn't matter if he dropped dead, no one would miss him. B. He genuinely didn't believe he would ever have a single person who would trust him because he trusted the wrong people. Though he prayed to whatever god or goddess would listen that he'd be wrong on that front. Not that he genuinely thought it would do him any good. But there was one actually listening, and it was the last one anyone would expect to listen to a man's pleas that, however, won't pan out for quite a while for the unfortunate youth. The poor boy honestly cried himself to sleep that night without even bothering to eat dinner, something he'd slowly become used to in the coming weeks. The next day, the boy would force himself out of bed. He didn't bother with much other than taking a shower with a bag over his cast, finding it far harder to clean himself with one arm. He would then begin brushing his teeth while drying himself off, and then got dressed to no one's surprise, with much difficulty. As he looked in the mirror, he could see his eyes looked far darker than usual. The hope and light had died, and he knew it at this point. His usual blinding smile and optimism had been replaced by some of the darkest depths one could imagine, and the deepest of frowns set in, but he'd shake his head, putting on the mask he swore he'd keep no matter how bad it got. Once again, he was wearing the fakest smile he could muster, to the point if you didn't know better, you'd never see through it. He had been bullied before this, but it never got to this extent. Sure, a small bit of money was taken, sure his pride got hurt time to time. But, at the very least, he could talk to people even if he didn't have friends in middle school. This, however, was very different. This was complete isolation, or so it felt like in his head. He would try his best to shake the thoughts off as he'd go to get dressed, gathering the stuff he needed into his backpack as he walked down the steps, grabbed a muffin and a small carton of milk, and just walked out the door without so much as a word to either of his parents. Not like they bothered speaking to him anyway. Today, though, he noticed it again. Out of the corner of his eye, he could have sworn he saw some eyes peering at him from out of a bush, and it was starting to freak him out to a point, so he walked up to them, finding a strange cat staring back at him. Like a whole black cat. He reached down to pet it, but it would shy away and bat his hand, gently scratching the back of it on reflex, causing him to actually sigh, looking down at the blood that flowed, and shed a few tears, muttering something under his breath along the lines of, "Geez, even a cat thinks I'm a lost cause, huh? Let's see what bullshit I go through today." In the back of his head, though, a dangerous thought had clearly played out. Such a pretty color, isn't it? That drew a strange reaction out of the cat that seemed almost human-like as it cocked its head to the side, with its eyes narrowing quite heavily, as if scrutinizing what was just said to it. Something that had actually stunned the brunette, as he'd never felt so judged by an animal, as he spoke softly. "Well, damn, seems it's not just people that judge me, huh?" There was a dark pain behind that laugh as the mask began to drop, if only for a second, as he gently slapped his cheek with his one good arm to bring himself back to being grounded, as he called it. He turned on his heel, walking away from the black cat, as a white one could be seen watching within earshot from not too far away, with what could only be described as a look of concern, both at the fact either of them were detected and the fact he wasn't put off by their presence in the slightest. The only reason for that would be a human with no fear of death, rather one who welcomed it wholeheartedly. To say this worried the duo would be the understatement of the year. The depressed boy would soon have two very constant pursuers in his life, as they couldn't just leave him like that. And to that note, he let out a soft sigh as he could now constantly feel eyes on him as he went throughout the day, beyond the obviously disgusted glances he was getting from people. He was silently making his way through the halls with his head down, as he pretty genuinely made zero efforts to correct anyone for the vile whispers he heard as he passed them by. It would appear the rumor mill worked far faster than he assumed it would. There wasn't a student in the school who hadn't heard the news by now, as he reported directly to Sona Shitori, who glared at him before spotting a particular look in his eyes. It was a look she knew far too well to be genuine depression and hatred of a situation they were in. For the first time today, he bothered actually looking someone in the eyes. As she went to open her mouth to address him, she seemed to pause for a moment. Well, I am in charge of you for the day, Hayato. To my understanding, you were caught peeping," she would say, sounding not accusatory in the least. She was absent of the day all this went down, but she couldn't quite believe the boy in front of her would do such a thing. But the report was clearly there on the desk as he just broke down from actual rage and screamed something along the lines of fucking course, that's clearly what I was there to do. It's not like two bastards who are probably going to jail for fucking raping a girl in a few years set me up, and I tried to fix a peephole only to get beaten within an inch of my life. Then physically get beaten within an inch of my life by said two bastards, only to be told by my own parents they'd be better off having a girl so they wouldn't have to deal with my perverted ass, and be told it would be a waste of time to bother calling the cops by proxy when the school doesn't even have the audacity to expel either the girls or the two boys. He gestured to the now broken arm with his good hand before just shaking his head, crying his fucking eyes out. The screams were loud enough to physically shake the glass, and he was sure people 2 floors up could hear him releasing all of his rage in that moment. While he had been on the list for potential sacred gear users, this was a mess all in it of itself for the student council president that she wasn't nearly capable of handling. He obviously didn't care in the slightest if she'd care, he just needed to let this out of his system. The volume of his voice was by far evidence of that. And to a point that did indeed hurt her feelings that he thinks so little of her. That said, she was aware he was wrongly accused. No one who actually did it would be this broken down. In the window, the two cats once more could be seen listening, in which alerted Sona to the fact both of the most dangerous women in the school were actively keeping an eye on the boy. A deep sigh could be heard as she'd fold her hands over her face, shaking her head. "Did anyone even try to hear you out? Be real with me, Hayato." The very faintest a glimmer of hope had shone in his eyes as he'd sit there thinking to himself for a moment before he spoke in a very soft whisper. Only two girls tried to defend me. I think they might have been members of the kendo team. One had interesting pink hair, and the other was soft-eyed but had brown eyes. They were looking at me with pity as they tried to stop their team members from beating on me. They were drowned out by the screams of everyone though. Sona seemed to nod at this, writing it down on some paper as she pretty blatantly spoke to him. I can see you feel slighted and that everyone is against you, Hayato. But I will personally suspend their practice over the next week on grounds of open assault of a student. I know it won't make things right and I can't quite stop the rumors. But I hope it does at the very least some good for you. But the brown-haired youth only shook his head as he chimed in. Just don't bother, please. They already hate me and I don't want them blaming me for any tournaments that come up if they lack the chances to practice. This was a response the girl had genuinely not expected. There might be more to him than meets the eye was the only thought that crossed her mind, with a small smirk appearing at the very edges of her lips as she tear the paper in two on the spot. As you wish, Hayato. And, be wary of cats, okay? To say it was an ominous warning wasn't even the proper word for it. He didn't quite know what to make of it as he gave her a truly puzzled look before going about his work silently. He was thankful for some manner of human interaction, but he just basically chalked it up to the student council president had to be kind to all students regardless of circumstances, and once more in that moment. The girl had sent out a telepathic message to one of her rooks to go talk to Keitase and Murayama to get the full story. And within the half an hour they sat there, she got exactly what she thought would be the confirmation. He hadn't done a goddess damn thing wrong. And to that, she gave a small nod as the telepathic link had been cut. A furrowed brow came across her generally stoic expression as she think to herself. How the hell did no one listen to them screaming their lungs out? Are the girls in the kendo club really that bloodthirsty? Out of respect if nothing else, the student council president turned around at her desk facing away from the boy to give him some privacy, even if he took it as a look of disgust, which she knew he most likely did. There was nothing she could do about that for now. She was going to have a very long chat with the rest of the council for allowing this to happen to a student later. His mask fell away completely as he assumed no one was watching. His visage was drenched in sheer morbid thought as he struggled through his assignments. He never was gifted academically, but he put forth the hours studying to get through school to make his mother proud, or at the very least acknowledge him. But it seems that wouldn't even happen anymore, and that caused him to silently weep bitter tears. Once again in the windows, the two cats could be seen silently giving a look of pity at the boy who'd seemed to spot them, thinking it was just his mind playing tricks on him as he blinked away some tears as they had vanished. Once more he looked down at that crimson scar lifted up on his right hand, seeming transfixed at the red liquid that leaked out of his hand as he'd reach into his backpack. He'd pull out a small disinfectant wipe, cleaning it off with a small grimace as he then placed a band-aid over it. He had always carried a small first aid kit around with him should he find someone hurt. It was a gesture first taught to him by his grandfather, whom he missed dearly. Scene break, with Koneko and Kuroka. The two had entered through a window to their very own hiding place within the building. It was an old and abandoned clubhouse in the old building that no one bothered venturing anywhere near. It was quite the nice place, as it belonged to some rich graduates of Kuo from the year prior. They both had a troubled look on their faces as the younger white-haired one spoke up, shocking the black-haired one in her usual monotone voice. "I think we should help," was all that she said, something that Kuroka never could have expected to hear, as her younger sister genuinely despised most men. Her catty and playful tone cooed back at her, seeming to carry through the room. I don't think we should, not yet anyway. I feel something dangerous from him. I can't quite explain it, but my senses are telling me he could be dangerous in the future." And upon the vocal tick, which always seemed so forced, a small tick mark appeared above the white one's head as she spoke somewhat grumpily this time. "It will be worse if no one helps him. Trust me on this, sis." Koneko, otherwise known as Shirin, had seen her fair share of people blow up after bottling things up, which is why she was observing the boy to begin with. Everything going on was a recipe for disaster, and with it being a potential sacred gear wielder, that was all the more reason to intervene in her eyes. Plus, the boy reeks of death to the point he was able to approach you while you had Senjutsu active. If we don't step in, he might, you know. She looked to the rooftops, clearly having felt his depression closest. It didn't take even a moment for the black-haired girl's eyes to go wide at the insinuation. They both stared out the window towards the Stuco's building, thinking this over as Kuroka added one final note in. "The boy wasn't just desiring death, he has a heavy affinity for ki. Maybe we should actually reach out to him." We will continue to observe him over the next few days, okay, Shirin? Which lead to the black Nico metaphysically getting punched with almost blinding speed straight into a wall without remorse. It didn't even really hurt her, as she just gave off a Cheshire grin seeing her younger sister stomping out of the room as she'd go into a fit of laughter hiding what she was truly thinking pretty well. She's right, but it's dangerous to overstep the devils in this. A sigh left her lips as she'd slowly climb out of the wall casting a spell to repair the damage as she'd go about her day heading to her classes. Scene break, back in the student council's room. Issei had somehow made it through all of the work he had to turn in even if the sheets were very obviously tear-stained. The boy's eyes were now puffy and red though he did his best to play it off like he wasn't just crying his eyes out for nearly 3 straight hours as Sona could feel herself breaking down listening to this. She had to call in one of the other members to bring him his lunch as she couldn't bear to turn to face him like this. To her, this was the deepest of failures she could have taken as a newly appointed president who was supposed to protect the student body. This to her was a glaring reminder above all else that she'd have to be stricter and investigate future incidents more thoroughly. A few glances of concern could be seen by her vice president Tsubaki. A mix of disgust for the boy but genuine confusion seemed to hit her all at once as a telepathic message from her king came to her. Wipe that look off of your face right now for Satan's sake. The boy did nothing wrong and that's clear as fucking day now. I won't tolerate any of my peerage making it worse for the boy, that's an order. The look on her queen's face could tell a story. She'd never been spoken to in that manner, be it in private, in a telepathic message or even for a genuine punishment. There was a cold fury brewing in the king's mind clearly over all of this, and no one was ready for the storm that would bring in due time. They'd both peer over their shoulders at the boy who had now slumped down against the desk clearly intent to just sleep away the rest of the detention sentence, as tears had freely flown down his cheeks in his sleep in the mere seconds he had put his head down. He was out cold from emotional exhaustion, and the true severity of the situation at hand began to sink in for both of them. Satan below, how broken is this boy over one event? Tsubaki would muse aloud knowing he was completely out cold. Sona was sure of one thing and one thing after hearing him scream, and she confirmed it out loud. If you think it's one event, you're very mistaken, dearest Tsubaki. He might genuinely transfer schools at this rate, and I couldn't blame him in the slightest. Regardless of what that will do to our school's reputation, I'll approve it if he seeks that route. And I fear those issues run even deeper than what happened at our school. His mask is far too practiced. Time skip. End of the school day. Issei was more or less panicking that he had passed out as the girl at the table shook her head with a small shrug. We all have those days. If you're expecting me to berate you after you got your arm broken with a pipe, you have me pegged for someone far worse than I am, Hayato. Again, be safe on the way home, okay? He had a single eyebrow raised, a clear impression of his arms on his face that lasted for a few minutes as he'd slowly register exactly what was said to him, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt that she might be a step up from most of the students here as he take a small bow as he tucked his supplies away into his black backpack, muttering a very soft "Thank you." If she weren't a devil, she truly never would have heard that. If nothing else, it was a small step in the right direction. That said, 2 steps forward, 6 steps back, as the old adage seemed to go for our unfortunate brown-haired boy. The moment he left the student council room, he had a whole book thrown at him, quite literally slamming him back into the room with a bloody nose as his eyes rolled up into the back of his head. The girl went as far as to kick him while he's down before running off as she screamed, "Die, you useless pervert!" Sona just stood up, absolutely bewildered that a student was just assaulted before her very eyes. The poor kid was absolutely out cold with blood running down his face as once more in the distance, a certain white cat was watching this unfold with a very pained look in her eyes at this point. But this time it went a bit different. Before Sona could react, the older of the 2 Nikos was on the scene, scooping the boy up into her arms damn near bridal style as she looked down with a face filled with pity, with a single thought running through her head. Shirin is right, things need to stop before it's too late. As she silently carried the boy up to the infirmary, going as far as to heal him with senjutsu as the nurse was already gone for the day. For the first time in ages, something he truly couldn't explain had occurred. He felt at peace, if only for a moment, and that planted a very dark thought in his head. Maybe this is what dying feels like. Being physically in contact with the depressed teen. She not only heard that thought, she felt it. The raw emotion and pain behind it. A pain so deep he preferred death to being alive, and it brought tears to her eyes. She knew it was bad, but not this bad. Her sister's worry was confirmed then and there. But there wasn't anything she could do for him in this moment, or that's what she thought. Something primal was warning her about the boy before her, a sign that she needed to get the hell away before he exploded no matter how bad she wanted to help him. Time skip, a few hours of rest, around 6:30 p.m. The sun had truly began to set, and the only ones on the campus were a few after-school clubs who had later meetups. The stranger clubs like the ORC and the student council, though no one would know this, had their own dorm on campus. The boy had risen up out of the bed quite confused as to how he had gotten there, finding a small note on his chest that would drop down. It had a simple paw print on it, and nothing else. He assumed it was a childish prank of the student council with a sigh. He put it in his backpack either way, even if it was silly. He took it as a kind gesture, or as close to one as he'd get. What he didn't realize is it was a pretty damn powerful sigil that would alert the two if any supernatural beings came around Issei, so long as he had it on him, even going as far as to identify their species and motive. It also doubled as a tracking device in case he tried to, well, unalive himself from heights, or in general, it would summon them to him. Kuroko was a very sly cat who mastered magic, Jujutsu and Senjutsu, so this was a pretty small feat for her. And she wasn't going to let her sister down, to say the least. The boy had once more offered up a pretty sincere and solemn prayer, still unsure if anyone would be listening in the slightest, but this time around. In his mind's eye he saw silver hair and piercing blue eyes adorning a beautiful woman, a bow in hand, and the most remorseful a look upon her positively breathtaking face. For some reason he felt like she could tell he was staring at solely her eyes, captivated by them. "Who are you?" he would mutter to no one in particular, which surprised him as she'd give a soft bow as if to introduce herself before pointing a direction. It led to the archery club building, which was seldom welcoming guests. At the point he was at, even if it was a delusion, he decided to take the leap, so to speak. He gathered himself up and actually marched down several flights of steps, making his way there. It's not like he was needed at his home. His parents hadn't even called his cell to check on him. And a sight unlike any other befell his eyes as he saw the latest transfer student. Diana was her name. He could hear the sound of an arrow streaking through the air as she pulled another back with grace, that finesse that he'd never seen before, to the point he just walked straight in. While he was aware the entire archery team was staring daggers at him, he wasn't paying them any mind, and they all took notice of something interesting. He wasn't staring at their newest ace in a perverse manner, but with one of genuine intrigue. It was like his eyes lit up, showing the very depths of that honey or amber color, as he walked forward completely entranced, and just sat down next to her, watching towards the target. The girl, who was known to hate men above all else, seemed to flinch at the sound before looking down with a smile, something that shocked everyone. The look he was giving was one she'd recognize anywhere. It was someone who recognized what the hunt truly was. Even if he didn't know it himself yet, he was sitting next to his patron deity, Artemis herself. And boy oh boy, wouldn't that strike a certain Nico Motto with surprise as a Greek goddess presence began to flare up off that talisman left and right, to the point she could be seen watching through a window with abject curiosity. Not a word was said between the two as he observed her stance, how she drew the bow, how she'd carefully knock the arrow, draw and fire all in one motion with the confidence of a marksman. He was like a man possessed in the moment as he'd rise up to his feet, looking over on the ground. He'd lift up a bow, carefully setting into a stance mimicking her to a ridiculous degree, even in a modified form. It was a near-perfect copy, which impressed Artemis to no end, along with the archery team, as he drew the bow back in a sight that would make some of them cringe as he held it with his casted arm, having some difficulty steadying himself, while visibly in pain from it, only able to really do this due to the healing from Senjutsu earlier. He didn't immediately fire, as she did, as he seemed to take more time focusing on the target. He'd let the arrow fly. An all-too-familiar whizzing sound filled the room, followed by a firm thunk. He had struck within 2 inches of the dead center, as he'd laughed gently to himself, speaking with a confidence he didn't know he had in him. "Well, damn. First time, and I almost got a dead center even if it wasn't a moving target. Guess that's what it means to replicate a true master's work, even if it's a poor copy in comparison." There was no pride behind it, just genuine praise, as he'd smile over to Diana as he gently set the bow down as he offered the deepest of bow, apologizing for intruding, and saw himself out. What they saw was nothing short of natural talent in the fondest of definition, as the silver-haired girl began to laugh out loud. "That much praise off seeing me shoot twice. I guess not every man in this world is blinded by pride, huh? And to do that while injured no less, yet not brag about it. That's a unique sight." The sheer thought she found a man who didn't disgust her was astounding by itself. The fact she found a boy who she knew was so broken yet could still smile like that was a whole other miracle that even Zeus himself wouldn't believe if he wasn't there to see it. Like a ghost, he had just left the location, going up to the roof of the school, seemingly thinking over life as he stared up at the stars. For the first time in quite a long while, he didn't feel quite as lost. He might just decided to take up archery eventually, he mused to himself as a passing thought. Shame I probably couldn't afford the equipment to save my life. Maybe if I sell my old consoles. And with that, the day came to a close as he arrived at his house, walked up the stairs and went to bed after snatching a plate of food since no one made him one. There were some pretty horrendous nightmares of the past plaguing him as that talisman once more sounded off quite frequently that night for signs of self-harm. Though he did so in a way that no one would visibly be able to catch him, or so he thought as he drifted off to sleep. The next day, 3 a.m. Sunday. The brunette boy had woken up from another cold sweat, a deep burning raking down his arm in the worst of ways. He had come to regret his actions the night before, as he never knew cutting himself would burn like actual hellfire the next day. He'd take to his first aid kit, slowly patching himself up with a grimace as the peroxide had burned even worse. He'd wrap his arm with gauze and carefully go get into the shower, bagging both of his arms this time as he'd struggle worse than the day before to clean himself. He was quite sure in that moment he wouldn't cut himself again. As he left the bathroom doing his daily routine, he chose to wear a very long-sleeved red shirt today, as he didn't want any worse rumors going around about him being emo or cutting for attention or some other hateful bullshit that his head cooked up should any of the students spot him. He got up and got ready for his day as he'd go for his usual morning jog, only to genuinely have rocks thrown at him by some of the male and female students. It seemed he couldn't have a peaceful day even when he wasn't at school, which was something he genuinely had began to detest. Once more he felt eyes boring into the back of his head and walked to those very same bushes as last time. This time, however, he was greeted by a small white cat that was visibly sniffing at his bandaged up arm as if she could tell. The cat began mewling and crying with what looked like tears coming down its face as it would brush up against his arm, careful not to hurt him, while it stared up at him with a look that cleared said, "Never do this again." He felt like he was going mad as he had physically began to assume what a cat was telling him to do. As that mask fell immediately, he'd carefully scooped them up into his arms. The boy pretty genuinely expected this cat to react the same way the other had and to attack him, but it was worth a shot to him, and much to his amazement and joy, the cat just began to purr softly, seemingly glowing a bit, though that must have been a trick of the eyes, right? He'd blinked twice, unsure how to register what he was seeing. "Seems I really need to get my eyes checked." As he said that, a look of confusion would appear on the cat's face before it dawned on Koneko. He could fucking see senjutsu without being aware of its existence or any training. How the actual fuck was the only thing on the Nekishu's mind. Even those aware of the supernatural couldn't see it usually if it's being used this subtly, and she was indeed hiding it, but for whatever reason he could see it clear as day. And so, she just forced herself to purr even louder so he wouldn't dare set her down as she was healing up those cuts. She wouldn't find out till later just how deep he dug, as even her healing attempt wouldn't get rid of those scars on his upper forearm. Thankfully for him, they would just look like drag marks from a bowstring, so no one would truly know what they would come later if they saw them. He stayed like this for around 15 to 20 minutes with the happily purring cat resting firmly on his arm, which seemed to be in less pain by the minute until it had completely faded, and just like that, she scampered back into the brush with a soft mew as if to say goodbye. "I really must be going nuts because that cat just said goodbye, I swear on my life." He'd mutter under his breath, still unsure of what the actual hell he just witnessed. He'd go to finish up his jog, pretty genuinely getting assaulted nearly every block as the light that had returned went out just as fast as it had appeared the other day. He went back home and just curled up in his bed, glancing over at the razor blades for a moment before shaking his head. "I shouldn't do that again," was all he muffled into his pillow as he began to pray once more. He normally wasn't religious to any extent, but it seemed to bring him better dreams, so he would pray to the silver-haired woman of his visions, still unsure of her name, as he apologized to her for harming himself. This didn't go unnoticed by Artemis to any stretch of the imagination. She was mortified to hear that admission and wanted nothing more than to rush to his side, but it would expose who she was. And so he went to bed for a very heavily depressed nap, only waking up around 6 p.m. once more, thinking back to the silver-haired girl he saw as he woke. He'd shake off the funk he was going through the day with as he'd carefully unwrap the gauze from his arm to try to change it, only to find the cuts he laid so deep within his right arm had all but vanished, leaving the brown-haired teen slowly rolling his arm in front of his standing mirror from left to right over and over. What? It felt like that would take months to heal. Did I fall into a coma or something? He'd lean down, sniffing himself, confirming he indeed had not as he just shake his head. Well, no use dwelling on it. Let's go to the pawn shop. As he mused that thought, he'd actually decided to lock in on an idea for the first time in ages. He'd slowly descend the building as he'd gather up all of his older electronic games, going to a local pawn shop and sold them all off, buying what looked to be a decent quality bow without a string and a good few arrows, a target included. He figured he would have to go to the local hunting shop to buy a bow string, as he'd sigh, throwing the quiver over his shoulder as he'd marched the quarter-mile there. It was a small mom and pop shop to his knowledge, and he couldn't have been more surprised to be greeted by the sight of Diana at the front register through the window that was slightly cracked to where she could hear what's going on outside. He'd stare pretty quizzically, as if he thought life was just fucking with him at this point, seeing the woman who brought some sense of serenity into his life. After a moment, when he put on the best mask he could, she'd call out to him, having spotted him in what he could only describe as an angelic voice. "Are you coming in, or are you going to keep staring at my eyes?" She'd coo over at him with her tongue stuck out at him. Even though she was offering such a playful gesture, she took in the sight of his broken down eyes, and a frown threatened to tear away that soft smile she wore at almost all times. A deep crimson blush would spread over the boy's face as he'd carefully set down the target and quiver by the door as he'd make his way, and looking over the store as he'd quickly find what he was looking for, deciding on a mid-range priced bow string that he recognized from the one he used earlier that day. I decided I'd try sticking to something other than video games for a change," he'd awkwardly admit, though the girl seemed to have an ear-to-ear grin hearing this as she simply replied, "You are always welcome at the archery club room, even if the girls are weird about the rumors. You changed quite a few minds, Mr. Mystery Archer. As for the bow string, it's free of charge, okay?" she said, openly staring at his red-sleeved arm, raising alarm bells in his head, but when she spoke it seemed to dull that, if only for a moment. Once more, a red hue covered his face as he'd let out a deep sigh. "I'm just thankful you aren't hitting me with a book, a pipe, or calling me a pervert, to be honest with you, Diana. I'll pay for this and be on my way, okay?" The girl actually grabbed him by the shoulder with a firm stare. It was a gaze of a hardened huntress once that he couldn't have imagined coming from such soft azure eyes as she spoke bluntly. "I know the smell of blood better than anyone since I've hunted since I was a child. Please come talk to me instead of harming yourself again, okay?" The brown-haired boy just stood there like a deer in headlights, his eyes as wide as saucers, as he knew damn well he couldn't lie or bullshit his way out of this one. Not in front of her, as his shoulders seemed to drop lower than she could have imagined possible on his figure, as he desperately and simply pleaded, "Please, for the love of whatever gods or goddesses there may be, please don't tell anyone. I can't take any more abuse from the students at school." If the boy's mask hadn't shattered in that moment, then it was plain as day to see the cracks running over half of it as it fell away. He still wore the fake smile, but his eyes screamed nothing but torture and pain, to the point she regretted calling him out. For the first time in over 3,000 years, the huntress, the hater of men, would outright jump the counter, just pulling him into the tightest a hug she could without injuring him further than he was, as the boy just started bawling into her shoulder. Not even his own parents gave him this luxury, is all he could describe it as. It felt safe. It felt like what he imagined home should feel like. Artemis cursed in her mind endlessly that she hadn't acted faster. Those prayers, she had received so many from him over the years, and did her best to send him whatever small blessings she could, but they honestly didn't amount to much in lieu of his awful luck with human interactions. Diana would slowly stroke his head, just whistling a relaxing tune, trying her best to calm him down in her own awkward way, and for what it was worth, it worked wonders on the boy. He couldn't explain it, but he felt awe in her presence, as if an actual goddess had descended to comfort him, and dear gods above, he couldn't be any closer to the truth. They'd stay like that for a while as she gently ruffled his hair. "Are you doing better now, Issei?" To his shock, she knew his name, and there was no malice to her saying it. It seemed like a pipe dream to hear his name in this manner to him. He was genuinely that broken that he began crying tears of joy, a sentiment that wasn't lost on her, to the point it brought her to tears seeing a child so beaten down. Whilst most knew her as Artemis, the vengeful virgin goddess, or Artemis, the defender of purity, she had a far lesser-known myth and title that she carried with a certainty and pride. Artemis, the torch-bearer. One who walked among the moonlight, guiding the way of those who were too weak to defend themselves, and her before her was a child who clearly lacked the fangs or claws of a beast. She decided then and there to do what she could to guide and protect him more directly. What she wouldn't know is this gesture was sadly too little too late in his mind. He once more found a serenity that allowed him to go to a much darker place than one could imagine. He found the solace to move on to a better life, as he firmly believed in reincarnation. He offered her probably the first true and genuine smile of his life, as his eyes had an unreadable look in them as he thanked her, carefully carrying the supplies he had brought and purchased out and to his home. and, unfortunately for the both of them, he was caught off guard by Matsuda and Motohama, who took the liberty to beat him senseless and break the bow he had just bought, tore up the target, and snapped the arrows over their knees, shattering any dreams he had left. In that very moment, the serenity in him had been replaced by abject horror and a desire to just end it all. He walked the last few blocks to his house, tears streaming down his face as he went up to his room and carefully put the broken remains of what he purchased away, as it seemed he wouldn't get to use them in the end of it all. His mind was made up. He was going to end it then, and there at the same rooftop he began to ponder that dream upon. For whatever reason, he grabbed his backpack, maybe for irony's sake, and wrote the grimmest suicide note detailing everything from the beginning of middle school until the very moment Matsuda and Motohama assaulted him and broke his archery equipment. If he was going down, he was taking everyone down with him in a blaze of glory in his mind. With that, he firmly set it in the backpack in a Ziploc bag so his blood wouldn't ruin any of the damn near packet of writing. Alongside the paw note he looked at with a soft smile. If nothing else, he appreciated what he thought was a prank from Sona and actually felt bad for what he was going to do at her school. As he set out, alarm bells were ringing out for the two cat girls in the worst of ways, but they thought it was just a nightmare, as he always had around this time, until they noticed where they were sounding off from. The boy crossed the devil's barrier at the school as if it didn't matter, and was clearly making his way up to the rooftop as Kuroka began cussing loud enough the heavens themselves might hear it. Konako wasn't too far off behind her, actually showing fear and worry across her face as she dashed off, completely forgetting she could teleport in that moment. Much like the two now wrapped in panic, a particular goddess had just finished closing up shop as it felt like her heart had begun to break. She ran to the scene to find splinters of the distinctly colored bow and parts of the now shredded up target, and she knew exactly what had happened. Students had once more attacked the poor boy who wanted nothing more than peace and a friend or two. Without any hesitation, she'd shift to her more adult form, the same one from his vision, and she too began sprinting towards the school with a truly blinding speed, jumping over cars and all, having masked her presence as a huntress does. She was greeted with a sight she couldn't bring her mind to wrap around, seeing a certain white-haired girl quite literally clearing 2 stories of the building to catch the boy who had openly slit his wrists as he jumped to make sure the job got done properly. The screams of the girl would echo so loudly through the building that she would be spotted by Sona and Tsubaki, who couldn't believe their eyes. While they knew things were bad, they couldn't imagine it had gotten to this point so quickly. Konako was screaming for her sister, for literally anyone to come help her, as she immediately began wrapping his wrists up with her shirt sleeves that she tore off, her ears and tail on full display as Issei's vision began to go dark. He'd seemed to laugh. "So you're the white cat, huh? Imagine that, here I thought I was going mad." She had quite literally barely made it in time, and as a portal opened up by the frantic black cat, they both began actively doing what they could to heal him, only to be greeted by a sight neither had expected. A mournful stare, yet one of hope, came from the goddess everyone knew to fear once she was enraged, came into view of the student council as she'd aid them in that effort, casting fairy-based magic, a little-known trick that she'd picked up from an actual fairy dragon thousands upon thousands of years ago. A full-scale effort to save the boy's life had been launched by the three as the two observers had come hauling ass out of the school building, bringing a small vial that was a deep crimson red. "We might not have Phoenix Tears on hand, but this is the second best thing. It's a potion to restore his lost blood. Your magic and senjutsu will definitely heal his wounds, but if we don't restore his lost blood, he's still going to die," Sona would say as she'd carefully uncork it, going as far and shamelessly to pour it into her mouth before kissing the boy, making damn sure he took the entire thing. Something she'd never do any other time. All the girls were staring wide-eyed at the boldness of the girl as she screamed, "What did you want me to let him fucking die? I am sick of watching people die unable to save them, damn it." She was referring to all the random strays that had been popping up lately, and they all nodded solemnly, as they too had been dealing with it, as Tsubaki would finally speak up. "He's going to know we were all here when he wakes. You can't wipe his memory. I tried it on a whim when he came to the club room just to confirm a suspicion," which earned a hell of a glare from Sona as she coughed, and continued. "He also casually walked through several barriers. And I'm about 90% sure he has some sort of sacred gear, so it was a matter of time until one of us had to save his ass. He just expedited the process. At least he didn't die on us yet." Hearing those words, Sona outright slapped her queen. Never jinx it, ever. Especially with a boy this unlucky. She normally would have raised her voice, freaked out, or said something against it, but holy hell, she was right, and it was very sobering for the woman as she grew silent, murmuring an apology. As they were slowly talking back and forth discussing how to handle this, Issei had completely woken up at some point, seeing the student council president and vice president with wings. Two cat girls over him glowing a faint blue as they continued to heal him, and what could only be described as a much older Diana. So either I've ended up in whatever any guy in their right mind would consider heaven, or I've somehow found my way into some supernatural bullshit, and this adorable white cat girl here saved me. That about summed this up. They all got quiet, staring down with actual surprise that he recovered that quickly. They clearly underestimated just how much 5 people actively casting healing magic would do for him as he'd carefully sit up, opening his backpack, staring at the sealed folder as he'd silently just handed over to Sona. I need to apologize to you first and foremost. I almost did something unforgivable on your school grounds. I can't imagine how bad that would have been for you. The boy was once more putting others before himself, something none of them could imagine in this moment, as he seemed to be taking everything far too well. He had turned to what he presumed was Diana, and he began slowly speaking, explaining himself entirely. When I left the hunting shop, I was ambushed by the 2 perverts who broke my arm to begin with, and they destroyed everything I sold, the last of my video games and all to purchase. I really wanted to join the archery club. The boy had confided in her, more so to the whole group, openly crying his eyes out now. It was such a fleeting idea, but to me, it felt like I had found a home for the first time. The mask he wore was visibly crumbling as he showed more and more emotion as he could see the 4 reading over the notes he had written, each growing more and more mortified as time had passed until they reached the last page. Something he could only describe as sincere bloodlust began to pour out all around him from the 2 devils and 2 nekashu. It was enough to unnerve the huntress as she finally was handed the papers. She barely made it 2 paragraphs in before she fell to her knees weeping as she clung to the boy as that angelic voice of hers slowly rang out in a pained way. It is indeed as you thought, Issei. I am the one who listens to your prayers. I am Artemis. I apologize for not just coming to aid you in the past. I couldn't due to supernatural laws. But now that all of that is out of the way, I won't leave you alone like that ever again. I, Artemis, grant you my word that I shall stand by you and try to give you a better life. It's the least I can do to one who prayed so genuinely to me. Kuroka, who had been quiet most of this time, sort of began laughing as she had managed to pull herself together from that fit of rage, shocking everyone there. Naya, haha. Honestly, it's far too laughable. Imagine that, we were all trying to keep him safe in our own way. She'd poofed down into the form of a small cat, giving him an idea of what she meant before swapping back with a catty wink. I do apologize for clawing Naya. She was doing her best to lift everyone's mood as it had grown far too heavy for her to deal with. You don't have any more to worry about, Issei. You have arguably 3 of the more dangerous beings in the world watching over you now, Naya. She'd point to herself, Shirin, and then Artemis. Also, my sis goes by either Shirin or Koneko, depends on the person. Back on topic though, it wasn't exactly an understatement. Sure, they weren't top 10, but they weren't a pushover by any stretch of the mind. Me and my sister here are regarded as some of the strongest yokai to ever live, right behind our leader. I apparently pass her in some regards, even if that's shameless to say. She showed right then and there she could talk without the vocal tick when she was being serious. Much to the brunette's relief, he enjoys some playful cattiness but can't handle it all the time. He was visibly taking a mental tally of what the girls were. So, Goddess, Nico, Mata. He would openly ask, clearly knowing there were sub-variants due to games, or so he'd assume. And from those wings I'd hazard a guess demons or devils. Though, they're quite beautiful wings nonetheless. To which Koneko quickly corrected. Nekasha, actually, we're a much stronger version of them. Neat to see you know your stuff though. Issei. She had chosen to shorten his name on a whim, which drew a deep smile from the boy. It's not like this would fix everything in the world, but for the first time in his life he felt like he had 5 friends who actually gave a damn about his well-being, and then a harsh reality had hit him as he looked at the ground. My own parents didn't even call to see where I was going at this time of night. Whatever semblance of a smile he had faded just as quickly, but a certain white-haired cat girl wasn't going to stand for that. She'd lift the boy up, carefully removing the cast from his arm to show that he was fully healed now. You said you wanted to join a club and that your materials were broken, right? Well, much like this arm of yours, everything can be fixed or in their case replaced. The normally relatively emotionless catgirl had began breaking out of her own shell for another's sake, which brought a smile to Kuroka's face as she keyed into what the younger sister was saying as she continued. I can pay for literally everything. I will get you the best materials I can if it makes you happy, Issei. No one deserves to go through that. No one deserves to have their dreams crushed. And I'm sure a certain goddess here could easily get those for me if I brought proper payment. To which Artemis nodded with a soft giggle. Indeed I can, young Nekishu. None of them quite wanted to leave him alone for the night, so they all would begin reaching for their phones as if to make a few calls before Koneko just shook her head, clearly reading the room. He's coming with me tonight, I won't accept any less. I've seen what his mind is like when he sleeps. It's vile and painful. I will keep him company tonight and walk him to school in the morning if that's fine. Those words would make the boy turn 8 shades of red at the implication. He wasn't an open pervert in any manner of the phrase, but the idea of spending the night with such a beautiful girl wasn't lost on his fantasies either, as he just stared and blinked. His thoughts clear across his face as she'd actually laugh before saying something to him that would just blow him and her older sister away, along with drawing some atomic blushes out of the other girls, Artemis included on that list, as her tone came out blunt but somewhat seductive. If another guy were to try what you're thinking, I'd kill him. But if it's you, I might not mind, simply because I know you wouldn't do anything that isn't welcome. You're definitely a pervert though. You gotta work on that. She'd tease him as she'd brush her tails against his cheek, and instinctively he'd reach up, grabbing one of them, leading to the loudest eep any of them could ever have recalled. All of that bravado went straight out the window. And a soft mew could be heard as she began to panic slightly. To his complete credit though, he let go instantaneously, mentally noting, "Tail sensitive, don't grab without warning," as he began apologizing profusely. "I really had no idea. Well, I had some idea, but I didn't mean to just GH." He was visibly and audibly backpedaling on the entire action as Koneko once more just began laughing. If she hadn't found him adorable and endearing before, she definitely did now. "Issei. It's okay, you just caught me by surprise, quite literally. Also, you literally pet my head and back for like 20 minutes straight before when I was in my cat form. Where's that same confidence?" She joked with him, clearly turning a slight hue of pink, having admitted that before her own sister. To their kind, that was the deepest form of endearment if it was to another species. A display of genuine trust. Nearly an hour or so had passed, and Issei had truly began to grow tired as he'd let out a very deep yawn. "So, I can get the gist of things. I keep the fact of what you all are a secret, and it's just something in my life now, right?" Sona was very thankful he was quick on the upkeep of current ongoing bits as she chimed in. "Yeah, basically the case. Hi out, Issei. And my name is actually Sona. I'm the younger sister of one of the 4 Satans. She's arguably the strongest woman in hell, period. You'll meet her someday soon. I hope you like magical girls." Again with a very cryptic message. One which he was somewhat unsure of how to respond to, but managed to put something out at least, and Satan be damned, he hit it right on the fucking head. Like from that anime. What was it called? Magical Girl Milky Spiral 7. As those words left his lips, she facepalmed hard enough to actually knock herself out, much to the confusion of all but Tsubaki, who began actually laughing so hard she had tears coming down her face. Holy hell, that's some irony. "Issei, you don't understand, that is her sister's show." A light of recognition sent clear across his face as he began audibly cackling. It wasn't a soft laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh, but he was just fucking losing it as Sona began coming to. Ugh. Did I actually just knock myself out? That had only made Issei laugh harder, to the point the poor dude couldn't feel his sides anymore, just rolling around on the ground. It once more took him a good 10 minutes to stop, still having to stifle a chuckle or two as he tried his best to be serious for her sake. "So, for what it's worth, I actually like her show and would love to meet her someday." Upon hearing those words, Sona's worst fear came true as a fiery circle rose up next to them, and out came Seraphal herself with stars in her eyes. Her face seemed confused seeing the bloody clothes the boy had wore, and looked up, putting 2 and 2 together quite quickly. "Mew Neo! Bad. Do not do that." Her tone was childish and her cheeks puffed up, but there was a sincerely motherly air about her as that tone hardened quite quickly. No matter how bad things get, young one, never end it before things can get better. Life is fleeting, especially for your kind. This was a side of Leviathan that her sister didn't see very often, and to say it gave her chills wouldn't do it justice as the woman made her way up to Issei, just pulling him into a hug. "I overheard what you were saying as I was checking in on Sona-tan. Are you okay, seriously?" She dropped all airs of her usual goofy personality, and was acting as one of the Satans in this moment, something he would hopefully not experience too often as he saw how uncomfortable it was making everyone around him. "I heard that you're a fan of mine. If it would help cheer you up, I'd like to personally invite you to one of the shoots in time. Until then, please try your best to smile and make it through this." She'd offer a small smile before changing back to her usual self, crying out, "It seems I am needed elsewhere to fight another battle. Your battle is no less serious, young man. Just remember, if you need Leviathan, I am just a call away." As she said that, she quite literally vanished as quickly as she came down into a unique-looking portal with the wave of her wand. He'd bring his phone out of his backpack with a puzzled look as he saw Leviathan as a new contact. How the hell did right, magic, still not used to that. Also, Sona, I can somewhat understand your reaction now. That was a clusterfuck to put it mildly. But she's also very nice. Honestly, all of you are. I don't feel like I deserve this. But I'll do my best to beat those thoughts back. Shall we head your place, Koneko, Shirin? Which do you prefer? To which the white cat girl only blinked, seeming to think it over. With you, either is fine. A small nod was seen as the boy sort of just flopped back. He pretty honestly couldn't walk as the adrenaline from all of this had finally wore off, as he quite literally fell back like a turtle just stuck there with his backpack on his limp noodles he called arms, and legs just swayed in Koneko's arms as the boy was carried away bridal style. It was very clear she did it just to fuck with him too, as Kuroka whistled behind them. Meow, married it seems. Earning a firm bap on the head from Artemis as the girls there all would just start laughing as one sentiment was shared amongst all of them. That went a lot better than expected. In all truth, they had expected him to lash out at each and every one of them for letting things get this bad, but to most of their surprise, the boy was as genuine as they came about accepting their friendship regardless of circumstance. That caused Tsubaki to cringe at her own nature being quick to judge, and she mentally promised herself to do better. After a good 10 or 15-minute walk up a large hill, the only hill in all of Kuo, Issei's eyes looked like they could have grown 3 times their normal size. "Wait, you live here? You own the mansion?" The reaction drew a soft laugh out of the white-haired gal as she stared down at him. "What part of strongest of our species didn't register with you? Me and Sis are basically royalty due to our power." It was in that moment he made a mental note not to piss off the women around him, even as a joke. As she walked up to the door, she was greeted by a maid that looked like a bunny girl in a maid cosplay, which threw Issei for a loop. "Didn't take you for the type." He joked, with her getting a firm slap across the ass with her tail as she glared down at him. "They were our parents' maids. All of them were orphans. The cosplay ESQ outfits are my sister's taste, not mine." To which the boy nodded, clearly thinking of it more admirable than anything else. Koneko would carefully take the backpack off of him, setting it aside on a desk, once more displaying how good she was with her tail as he'd get thrown onto what felt like a giant marshmallow. The largest bed he'd ever seen quickly drew him in, and she slowly stripped down to nothing but her bra and panties out of sight as she'd snuggle up against him, with Anaya quickly drifting off to sleep. If he wasn't so damn exhausted, his poor mind wouldn't have let him sleep either. The last thought he had as a warm blue light enveloped him was that the girl was far too trusting of him before the realization hit him. Oh right. She'd literally damn near kill me if I tried anything that wasn't welcome. Little did he know she could hear exactly what he was thinking, though. He was right before that thought hit him. She trusted him because she understood him better than he probably understood himself. Senjutsu was a hell of a thing. Close to 4 in the morning, Koneko's room. To say Issei was confused waking up in her bed would definitely sum things up. He thought everything was some weird fever dream as he was dying, but looked down and yep, cat ears. And he did what any guy in this situation would do. He carefully turned and reached up, gently stroking them, clearly loving the feeling of them, but he wasn't quite aware of what he was doing to her. He woke up a sleeping beast of a woman in the teenage cat girl quite swiftly as she stared up at him with predatory eyes. It only took him a moment or two to register that look that clearly said, "Keep that up and I'll fuck you within an inch of your existence." He could have swore her pupils had turned into hearts for a moment as she shook her head to calm herself down. Sure as hell wasn't telepathy that got the message across, but it might as well have been, as he'd promptly cease his actions, seeing Koneko audibly and pretty literally panting with what looked like puffs of steam leaving her lips as she muttered to him, "Sheesh. I know I said it was welcome, but you are very forward, aren't you?" Causing the brunette to turn such a dark shade of red that she thought he was a red dragon for a moment. "Cute," was all she muttered as she looked over the clock. They had well over 4.5 hours before school would start anyway. She was sincerely lucky it wasn't a heat cycle when he chose to do that, or else she might have missed a whole day of school. It was pretty duly noted that he was very good with his hands. She knew it somewhat from when he was petting her, but she never expected him to be so gentle or caring with her in her Nico form, or that she'd be so damn sensitive to it. A part of her was admittedly curious of what those touches would feel like on her tail, but she'd snap herself out of that daydream real damn fast as he spoke softly, trying not to wake up the house. "So, I'm pretty sure you just had hearts for pupils. Am I seriously going nuts, or?" She'd sigh deeply with an awkward expression, trying to think of how to explain this. Simply put, it's something my sister did so she can tell if how do I say this? If I go into heat, it's dangerous for our race, as I'm sure you can fathom from the stare I was giving you. Without missing a beat, he quite literally blurted out. So you have literal fuck me eyes, got it? Before he'd cover his mouth, looking absolutely horrified that he said that out loud, which put the poor cat girl in stitches laughing. It was certainly a first time she heard it put that boldly. Yes, Issei, I quite literally do. So be careful with those magic hands of yours, okay? And be damn sure not to show my sister that talent. She'd give him a small jab to the side with her elbow as they just laid there holding on to one another. Certainly not how he thought he'd wake up with his new friend, but he sure as hell wasn't going to make it awkward in that regard, as she clearly trusted him near her almost nude body. The million-dollar question finally landed, as he was far less exhausted now, as he jokingly raised his hand as she'd lick his cheek, leaving him with quite the bewildered look as she chimed out with a truly playful tone. Feel free to share with the class. Do that again and I'll lick you again out of spite though. Your expressions are fucking priceless. She'd giggle, clearly listening intently, as she still radiated that soft blue light as the boy began to speak exactly what was on his mind. So why me? Why help me specifically? I heard about sacred gears, whatever those are, but like your actions are far too personal to just want to use me or some stupid bullshit answer like that. The look from you and your sister's eyes is far too piercing and understanding, as if you've witnessed everything I've been through. His words were cut off as he began slowly seeing what looked like a small clip playing in front of him of the day she lost her mother and father to a car wreck on paper, but a supernatural attack in reality. Then of all the endless painful days of training under an interesting-looking Kaitsune, as his words began to resume. Oh, does that mean? He was slowly piecing two and two together, and the realization hit him like a brick wall. Fuck, that means both you and your sister saw my worst nightmares and memories in person, and experienced everything. I could feel your pain from that small look into everything, and I know how broken I am. He was cut off with a soft kiss, as she knew that was the fastest mental reset she could pull, effectively giving up her first kiss to calm down her newfound friend. And shut him up it did. The male had damn near flailed, trying his best to calm himself down, knowing the meaning behind her actions. He wasn't dense, nor was he a moron. Was that really fine, Koneko? He tilted his head to the side, looking into her eyes, clearly calm now. I can understand the feeling of knowing you better now. I can't imagine how close you feel to me, but please never do anything that would make you uncomfortable. Even now, in a moment like this, the boy was exuding an aura of caring and compassion that made her feel wanted, and she knew he'd never see himself in this light. Well, not for a long time anyway. That made her feel like she should do her best to help make things better, and he could in turn feel everything she was feeling. Turns out having senjutsu used on him so often actually awakened it inside of him subconsciously. A very welcome surprise to her, as this means she has even more reason to spend time with him as a teacher now. She had secretly hoped he'd be a power type like her. The truth of the matter will probably shock the supernatural world down the line though. Her eyes seemed to light up a deep purple for a moment, as she'd look him over from head to toe to confirm it entirely, as she spoke with a sincere joy. Well, I guess that's as official a welcome to the supernatural as it gets. You've gained the ability to use ki to some extent, and it's actually mind-boggling how deep your systems run. You have higher potential than either my sister or myself. The cat girl, upon realizing this, reached over, grabbing Issei's phone, and called Sarah Fall to get Sona's number. Quickly, she added it into his phone and gave her the interesting news, to which he could hear her cheering in her usual childish manner before having to hang up. They both shared a look of "I can't get used to that, at all," before the dial tone began for Sona's number. A very groggy Sona answered, hearing both Koneko and Issei on the other end. So, Sona, I'm going to have to take Issei and my sister to Kyoto for a week. Issei seems to have awakened quite the vast ability to learn senjutsu and ki manipulation. To the point it's stronger than both of us potentially. The sound of Sona gasping before springing up and beginning to write out some papers could be heard. She had definitely put the fire under the Stuco president, as a now wide-awake Sona was heard. You can go, but promise me to try your hardest, Issei. And Shirin, you should probably take Artemis with you. Just a hunch she'll be useful to training his resolve and technique. If he has that much potential, you should make him a perfect all-rounder. The thought hadn't even crossed her mind until it was brought up, as she stared up at the boy with sparkles in her eyes. Hey Issei. When I'm through with you, no one in this world outside of the top 20 should be able to mess with you again. I hope you're ready for that. A visible sweat drop appeared over his head as he'd seemed to mull it over in his head before he'd just shrug. Fuck it, not like my family will miss me. Not like I have any better plans, and I'd like to visit Kyoto with you, Kuroka and Artemis, to get to know you all better. She had started blushing more and more upon hearing those words. What she hadn't told him yet was due to the glowing blue light. She could feel everything he was thinking, and she heard that hidden desire loud and clear. He wanted to date them all but wouldn't ever be able to approach the issue, so he'd rather get to know them and pick one. That said, the white cat was more of a schemer than her sister in some regards. And this moment was no exception to that, as she had a grin wider than the Cheshire Cat himself, and she would say something knowing Sona was still listening. Hey Prez, are you going to be the one to tell him about that, or should I? The sound of writing stopped dead in its tracks as she knew exactly what the Nekishu was hinting at. Are you really going to make me tell him that? To which she got a catty. Yep. Followed up by Sona face desking, trying to knock herself out but failing with a groan. So Loverbe. What she's trying to force me to mention is harems are commonplace in the supernatural. Oh, and if she's got a blue aura around her, she can currently read your thoughts. Take that, you fucking cat. Koneko's tone was absolutely indignant and sassy when she revealed her trump card. Oh you bitch, I was going to have fun with that, why? You could almost see Sona shrugging with a smug smirk. Because let's face it, you can beat my ass 6 ways to Sunday. I have to take a win somehow. The exchange actually had Issei rolling in the bed laughing for a moment before those words sunk into his head, giving him the most dumbfounded stare possible. Wait, what? The gears had began slowly chugging along, and Koneko had changed it to a voice call so Sona could watch this too. It was actually comical to watch with how expressive the boy was when he was calm. The confusion, the excitement, the relief, the guilt, the consideration, and then back to excitement as it all settled in. Holy shit, I don't have to force myself to pick. He was over the moon at that moment, as he had admittedly fallen for each of the 3 for his own reasons. To which Koneko immediately ripped the wind out of his sails for fun, though it wasn't quite out of jealousy, or anything, just aimed to keep him grounded. Well, yeah? Me and Sis will probably want to share you, though I'm not too sure with Artemis. I heard from her you hugged her, and she didn't freak out, so like. You probably have a far better chance than any other man alive. To say the boy looked like a kicked puppy was the most accurate thought that both Sona and the cat girl shared, as she'd wave and hang up the call with a mutual giggle between the two. You can figure all of that out over the next week or so, take your time. Don't rush anything and fully confirm how you feel about all of us. It might be a passing phase or a hero complex. Though she knew better than that, and it was said purely for his own benefit, he took those thoughts to heart. He didn't want to risk hurting any of the girls either. He put the brakes on all of that for a moment, as he'd seem pensive, as he'd speak slowly and as calmly as he could about this. I fully realize I won't always be able to be this relaxed, especially without you by my side. But, this is nice, honestly. It scares me to think of how hard all of this is gonna hit me once it all sinks in that I nearly killed myself though. A look of shock and horror had splayed across the catgirl's face as she too realized he hasn't had time to process a damn bit of this properly. Part of why he's taking all of this so well is definitely the fact he's most likely in shock still, and it made her let out a distressed mew. Issei. I'm very sorry to be rushing you into all of this. I've never been so excited to have a new friend. Because of what I am, I can't really get close to anyone for fear of exposing them to this world I live in. She admitted as her ears had completely folded to the top of her head. Her previously wagging tails would stop and coil against his leg as if trying her best to comfort him as she clung to him with renewed fervor. It really will be a bumpy road ahead, she would think to herself as she silently snuggles into him with growing depth. Around an hour or so passed in sheer smothering silence as he'd reach up, gently stroking her head as he noticed the blue aura had faded away. She was giving him time to truly feel what he needed to feel as it all came crashing in at once as the boy began sobbing into her pillow, pulling her in closer. I nearly did something so fucking stupid. When you caught me, it was like a scene from an anime or a movie. I think I fell in love with those beautiful eyes of yours when I looked into them and saw those cute ears of yours. I know that's probably shallow. It's the same thing I noticed with Artemis. You are both too beautiful in your own rights. I can't contain myself when I think about it. I adore your sister's wit and caring nature. It's clear she took more time to think about how to handle me as a whole than most in my life have spared me even a notion of disgust. She's a wonderful person. His tirade had drawn more than a few hints of red across her cheeks as she'd peer up at him, looking carefully as he'd reach down, gently lifting her chin up. He kissed her on the forehead. What you said may have been right to some extent. If I were a more idealistic man, I might have had a hero complex about you. But, no. I can say I fell in love with your genuine kindness and worry about me. I kind of knew you were the kitten I held and pet when I felt the same warmth from you. Earlier you thought I was far too kind, but no, I'm probably a cruel and merciless bastard under a kind facade, which truly scares me, and I hope I never become that. I feel so weak when I think about what I could become after one step on a bad day. But I recognize those around me who deserve it, you know what I mean. Beyond that, I'm scared to become strong, as I am afraid I'll fall to the desires of revenge against those who've hurt me. To humans, absolute power corrupts absolutely unless guided properly. So, please don't leave my side, even if this is a selfish request. One day I'd like to call you the name on the tip of my tongue. I'll keep it to myself for now, though. Her ears perked completely up as she had the world's most curious look now, as she'd outright pinned the boy down. No, tell me or I'll take it off your tongue by force. He had already all but confessed to her, and the girl was sure she wanted him, be it a gut instinct or just a personal desire. I mean it, I'll kiss it out of you. She'd coo down at him, casually bouncing on his lap, knowing damn well what it'd do to him as the bed began to emit a very low and rhythmic squeaky sound, risking alerting the maids or her sister as his biggest fears. He would do anything to get her off his lap in that moment, so he'd concede priority fast. Fine. If it were up to me, you'd be my personal perfect cat. God, I want to die. It was a play on words due to how loud she purred the first time he held her, and to her, while it was cheesier than actual cheese, it was also the sweetest thing she was ever told. And in that moment she just let her inhibitions go and leaned forward, kissing him with wild abandon, just losing herself in that moment. She refused to let him go, or to let him escape her claws in that instance, as he melted into it, only for a shadow to appear in the doorway. Kuroka's voice calling out. I heard the bed squeaking and the phrase perfect cat. Damn sis, you work quite fast. She'd call into the room. In reality, she'd been standing by the door most of the night, making sure they'd both be fine, but chose to cockblock her ever-loving younger sister. It would look like 2 stacks of steam began to billow above them as she'd physically screech at Kuroka to close the door, as the black cat was pretty sure she did enough to stop what was about to happen, though to her credit she held up a single pointer finger, simply saying, Everyone gets at least one, past that, he's all yours sis. A more or less silent nod of approval at who she had chosen. Though the black cat would let her in on another secret, gesturing the motion of petting ears as the white one would cuss pretty openly. God damn it, she knows. You're fucked later, Issei. Literally. Sorry in advance, my prince. She heavily muffled or whispered the last bit, even though he still heard it. Sure, they were both riding a hell of an emotional high, but that didn't change the fact he just asked her out, and she answered in kind, leading to them both making a promise to themselves to treat the other better than one would royalty. It was almost comical of how alike their thoughts were, something they wouldn't realize much until later. While either of them are dense, they can't register looking into a mirror. Issei had chosen to lighten the mood in the best way he could imagine, as he'd lift up a pillow and immediately just pumped it across Koneko's face after kissing her, as he'd skitter out of the bed laughing, only to get railed with a pillow with just enough force not to hurt him as she'd stare him down. Her face was scarlet red and she was pissed he played dirty, and he was about to feel the consequences of it as another pillow exploded against his body, sending feathers absolutely everywhere, as he was hysterically laughing at the nonsensical sight before him. Sure, those pillows were hitting him like a bag of flour at full speed, but seeing the old cartoon esque sight of feathers going everywhere tickled his funny bone in just the right way, and he'd rush back towards the bed, grabbing a pillow as he started an impromptu pillow fight, not caring that she was probably hundreds of times stronger than he was. He still decided to full send, getting a few good hits in while she quite literally slapped him around with a massive pillow. Both of them were having the time of their lives regardless of how old they were. This was a first for him. One memory of many to come, and a much better route than he was going down. As they say though, from the bottom of the well all you can do is go up. And this particular cat was dragging him out by force one way or another. Even if the entire world were to turn against them, she'd stay by his side. That was what she decided. This went on for actual hours, to the point Issei was thoroughly defeated and couldn't actually move, as he'd get lifted up once more bridal style and carried off to the bed. Seems I've slain the beast of burden. She'd joke with him, kissing his cheek as she'd snap her fingers, a unique cantrip her sister taught her would restore the mess they'd made to its natural state. You know, not feathers all over everything and still inside of the pillows, as she'd hear him yawn and pass back out. MH. He can rest a few hours before we go shopping for him, I guess. She'd huff with a soft smirk, clearly contented as she flopped down on the bed, waiting to hear what more would come from this mysterious broken boy. A thought had actually occurred to her, though. She never did quite tell him what a sacred gear was. So she'd have to pay close attention to his dreams in the coming week. It may give a hint as to what it is. Little did she know, he was already experiencing that very dream as she thought about it, and he began thrashing about in his sleep. Nothing she did would calm him this time, though, as she called her sister to help hold him down so he didn't injure himself. Kuroka had a knowing look in her eye as she'd seen this happen before with an older friend of hers. Well, Shirin. We will know what his gear is within this week, as it's manifesting in his dreams now. Don't try to use senjutsu currently. It's dangerous, trust me. The younger of the two was visibly panicking. Not even a minute ago they were laughing and having fun, and now it looked like the boy was fighting his worst inner demons imaginable, and she couldn't do a damn thing about it. It was steadily breaking her heart as she'd say a single phrase. A true bumpy road ahead. To which Kuroka simply nodded and replied, Indeed. This could make or break his path. I'm really hoping he didn't gain a cursed or evil sacred gear. By the aura he's putting off, I can promise you it's a Longinus, but it's strangely not one I recognize yet. Its aura is far too chaotic and unstable. It's like it's fighting with him rather than working with him. Chaotic, yes. Unstable, no. Issei was in his mindscape, actively free-falling from what seemed to be an endless height as he heard a voice call out to him in a truly sultry tone. Why do you fight it? Feel the wind, embrace the ride. Even a human can have wings if you give yourself the chance. The voice seemed to call out from everywhere in the room and nowhere, setting both the cat girls on edge. Much to Kuroka's relief, it wasn't any of the known evil gears. But there wasn't a Longinus that had a female voice like this to her knowledge either. Let alone one strong enough to give itself physical form without manifesting. From the gist of what was said, it sounded like his would be incredibly difficult to control, though, as it was based around one of the cardinal elements. As someone who practiced jiu-jitsu, she knew this would be actual hell for a boy who just got access to the supernatural world, or so she'd think. That ridiculous potential was shared through many facets, as he had given up his life willingly once. The wind was what he had become most compatible with outside of darkness. It wouldn't be an understatement to say he probably has the highest affinity to the wind amongst the human race, as he seemed to stop thrashing about in his sleep. So, all I have to do is follow the scale right, and you say I'll be able to fly. Isn't that interesting? He was more amused than a kid in a candy store as he'd get down in a stance similar to an inline skater mixed with someone aiming to skydive giving it a go. He wasn't quite sure why, but the crouched pose made sense to him as he'd lash his legs out forward, trying to physically skate on the air, and much to his surprise, it was working. More than just working. He was traveling through the sky as it slowly turned from a daytime sky to a midnight sky filled with stars, as he saw what looked like a jet-black raven ESQ's shadow soaring beside him. He could make out a woman's figure in it, very barely clothed, as if wearing darkness itself as her cover. For some reason he just knew instinctively that this was the voice he had heard earlier. Who are you? And where am I? This can't be a dream, it's far too real. I can feel the wind on my skin, the moisture in the air. I can tell you are actually here with me, but I can't put it to words as to why. To which she just offered a playful shrug, pointing to a finish line a decent ways away. If you can race me and win, I'll give you the answer you seek. If this were the brunette boy from 2 days ago, he probably would have backed down on the spot, but he was determined to change for the better. He felt it in his very soul that this would be a momentous win if he could get it. I'll give it a go, but I'll ask a single handicap. I can get a general feel for your top speed, and if you use it, there's no way I'll ever win, so can you match my speed and we'll make it a test of skill rather than power? A rather devilish grin had spread across the visage of the bird. It was almost unsettling to look at, but then he realized something. This was probably the first time anyone asked the correct question, as it nodded instead of speaking. I think I know who and what you are, but if that's the case, that makes this so much more interesting. Queen of the North Wind, Boris. The biggest hint I got was the correct path was always leading back to a loop to the north. You set it up to reveal yourself either during the race or after it if anyone was smart enough to take a hint. The man had done it. He hit it hook, line, and sinker as her voice called out in a resounding tone. So there is a man of your race who isn't a complete moron, thank God. I killed every other host for calling me a man. Those words put a certain white cat on the highest of red alerts, getting ready to dive in there by force as Kuroka had to restrain her. Sis, I get it, just don't. Please have faith in your prince. By the sounds of it, he guessed who she is. which is nothing short of a genuine miracle. Either that or your prince is a fucking nerd about mythology, one of the two. She'd laughed to herself. Issei was sitting there in the air thinking over what she just said. You know, I kind of get it now why Artemis hates dudes hearing you say that. Objectification and perversion of one's own lore has to get old, let alone the constant attempted use of force in olden eras. The goddess of winds would call out to him with a sing-song voice filled with absolute ecstasy that her host wasn't another waste of time for a change. I can see how you won the virgin goddess over and the two cats who are watching over you. Just know, dear boy, there is far more to me than your myths ever would tell you. I am a far more driving force than just the north wind. The truth of my nature is that I am a primordial goddess of the wind itself. Your kind reduced me to the north wind and a male out of pride and refusal to acknowledge my strength. Grandiose rambling aside, I'll give you 3 chances to beat me in a race as you've piqued my interest, even if you don't win this time. You are free to challenge me whenever you feel you can improve. The brown-haired youth would flash a soft grin as he'd laugh out loud as he began riding the winds faster and faster. This alone was enough to take the goddess aback for a moment. It wasn't prideful, it wasn't ambitious, it was just sheer raw joy. He had freedom beyond all words and he knew it, but he wasn't letting it go to his head, he was just living in the moment. A true free spirit by all means. As for this moment, all of his burdens and pains slipped away, and he truly enjoyed himself. Something unheard of happened though. In an instant he was surrounded by 3 girls riding along in the slipstream of air he was generating, leaving Koneko pretty openly screaming, as she had no clue what was going on. Kuroka had just an amused grin as she was casually sitting in a criss-cross pattern, just enjoying the breeze if one could call it that, and Artemis was absolutely screaming in delight, assuming this was just another dream of hers, until she sensed a familiar energy, spotting the other goddess watching her as her jaw dropped, and she spoke. Boris? Who? Wait, how? Aren't you dead? No one has seen you in actual millennia. To which the goddess of winds nonchalantly shrugged and answered. Much like many other high-end supernatural beings, I wound up in what you call a sacred gear. I'm the 14th Longinus lost to time. And my current host happens to be the magnificent dumbass you're riding behind. To which Artemis would let out a genuine laugh hearing Issei call that. It fits somehow or another. Oh, and since you're all here, it seems you'll get to witness our 3 races to see if he's worthy to inherit my wings. This immediately got all of the girls sit more or less take the same sitting position as Kuroka, as something very interesting had happened. The wind itself seemed to dance around Issei rather than Boris, something she'd never witnessed before. This was a boy truly loved by the wind itself. What looked like wheels began forming at his feet as he crouched down, getting ready for the race. He was building a truly ridiculous amount of speed to the point she wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to control it, but she matched his pace at every given moment. As Artemis counted down slowly from 3, Issei would scream out one simple thing as he took off. Let's ride the wind. There was a true unbridled joy behind those words which all of them could see, feel and admire. The boy who was shackled down by guilt, the boy who was shackled down by self-doubt, the boy who was shackled down by the words of many was given the most fitting inability. It was no wonder why he'd take to it so quickly. In many ways, Boris was impressed. It was as if the very nature she was born from was giving him every advantage it could, and he was maximizing the potential of it at every given motion. Every drag of his legs forwards and back would trail into another current which dragged him further, faster and faster, as he was pretty openly pulling tricks in mid-air, as if he were at a skate park grinding rails which slowly were given physical form even to the girls trailing behind him. They could see it. There was a strange purple light forming within the wind, quite literally matching Boris' feathers. Even if she wasn't giving him access to the gear, he had genuinely taken control by sheer desire to enjoy this race to the fullest. It wasn't even halfway through the distance when the goddess just decided fuck it and started giving it her all. A part of her didn't want this to end in a single race if she had anything to say about it, as she pulled ahead of him, mimicking a few of the stunts he was pulling, finding vast joy in such things. Artemis had a strange look on her face as she'd simply call out to Issei. If you win, you're going to be crowned as king of the sky. Give it your all. Hold nothing back, dear boy. The goddess of the hunt clearly knew far more of what was going on than the other two. This wasn't a test to unlock a sacred gear. This was a rite of passage for those who wished to follow the road of the winds. An ancient ritual that was long since lost to time, and would grant him one hell of an advantage over most supernatural beings if he pulls this off. To the four's mutual surprise, Issei had began slowing down drastically, but the force at his feet began piling up more and more, growing far more dense until it formed what could only be described as solid mass rather than gas. His eyes darted around, seeming to establish a pace he planned to move at as she sat down into that pose again. This time, when the revving stopped, he'd flip forward over a vast distance, seeming to fly through the very sky itself before landing on a set of rails, grinding down them faster than the goddess could fly. "The hell is that?" was all Boreas had time to call out. In a blink of an eye, the boy could be seen inches from the goal as he completely ran out of energy, barely passing over it. He seriously gave it everything he had in that moment, tapping into every single reserve of ki he had without even knowing how to properly do it, converting it all to magic power through sheer willpower. In a few years, this boy would probably become an unstoppable force, was the first thought racing through Artemis' mind as she just slowly blinked at what just happened. The one most surprised was Kuroka, as he just pulled off something that has only been theorized and never actuated. The goddess everyone once knew as the unrelenting primordial wind had just taken a bow to the boy, who was out cold as her voice rang out. "O child so loved by my winds, I cannot wait to see where fate takes you. And to you three, I cannot thank you enough for saving my host's life. Today is a day I never thought would come." The race was over and the three were brought to what seemed to be a palace of amethyst gemstones. "You three are to train the boy over the next week, yes? If so, when he goes to rest, I shall begin training him to utilize me in the best way possible, and we will create a finalized form for my sacred gear, though. I think the boy has an idea already with how he was riding around." She would let out a soft chuckle, letting them in on one of the biggest secrets. Some sacred gears could shift their look and form based on their user. As that bomb was dropped, they were all cast out of the mindscape to allow Issei to truly get some rest, which was far more than hard-earned at this point. In reality, not even more than a minute had passed outside of that space. The black and white cat girls had just snuggled around him. With a shrug, the black cat would say, "Well, I guess there's a first time for everything, eh? I've never seen the process of taming a sacred gear before. Azazel would have a heart attack if I told him about this. For now, let's rest for say an hour, and then go get some new clothes for Issei, shall we?" To which a very mentally exhausted Koneko would nod, drifting off to sleep, not caring what they needed to do right then and there. Close to 6 in the morning, Koneko's room. Around 2 hours had passed as the trio had completely gone out cold in Koneko's bed. Issei was once more pulled into his mindscape, his very soul, so to speak, to talk with Boris once more. The goddess seemed more than slightly pleased to be in his presence once more, with a soft giggle leaving her lips. "You really didn't hold back to pass my test now, did ya? Took you a whole 2 hours to come back to me after that stunt. What do you have to say for yourself?" To which the boy could only awkwardly scratch the back of his head, with a sweat drop above his head pretty visibly as he began to speak rather calmly, all things considered. "Where do I even begin? First and foremost, Boreas, I have to thank you. I have never experienced such joy, such freedom, and to be able to share the skies with one as powerful as yourself was nothing more than ecstasy itself." If nothing else, the boy's vernacular was well versed and quite diverse. He seemed to take a moment more to think before speaking, not giving her a chance to reply just yet. Words cannot convey how I truly felt in that moment. There was a desire to win, a desire to surpass myself, a desire to go so fast it would kill me. That last one was worrying, to say the least. But, above any of those, I desired to share the wins with the three who were with me and show them what that freedom felt like to me. It was the same freedom their very presence offers me. He nodded twice on that note, clearly blushing a deep shade of red, admitting that to the woman. The sheer lack of any personal vanity, pride, or negative traits blew her away. She only seemed to blink a time or two before her head cocked to the side, seeming lost in thought. "Artemis didn't tell you what that test truly was." "Well, she did, but you clearly were far too focused, Issei. It wasn't a test to gain the right to use the sacred gear, it was a test to become my successor. My equal, my partner. And I can say with absolute certainty I could never ask for a better partner. You understand the value of freedom that my power offers, yet you don't wish to gain it for negative reasons. I can feel everything that you are feeling, and in regards to that, I will grant you complete control over how we design the sacred gear's abilities, unique forms, and everything therein. All but one, that is one I will make a mirror of myself. I just hope you never have to resort to that, as it will be a copy of my powers at their very peak, and it may drain everything out of you, your own life included, if you don't train well enough to handle that level of power." He was just nodding along all the way until that last bit, as he'd raise his hand as if it were a classroom, causing the goddess to raise an eyebrow before he spoke pretty bluntly. "I won't use your power if that's the case." A true look of shock, rage, and disappointment overtook the goddess, to the point she actually fell over, staring up at him. "Excuse me? Is it not worth it to you? To her surprise, he would answer quite curtly in regard to that accusation, and it was with a very measured line of thought. Worth it? Yes, it is worth using, but not at the chance I could make my cat cry. I never have had good luck. For what it is, there's a high chance that ability could get activated over something small due to how emotional I am before I even have a chance to begin training for it. I don't believe even for a fucking second that a single week will bring me within a reasonable level to contain that much power. I've played far too many video games to understand what that kind of curse could do to me. The raven-cloaked beauty would slowly rise to her feet, acting like she was dusting herself off as she took a deep breath. More like 10 or 20 of them, but hey. For genuine a moment her anger had gotten the better of her, because refusing the gear was akin to refusing a goddess's blessing by proxy. It didn't just hurt her ego, it demolished her pride, something she'd never experienced to that extent until then. She could definitely confirm she didn't like that, but he was completely right. You actually bring a fair point to the table. I hadn't even considered your say in that, and was just going to grant you my full power from the beginning. That was foolish on my part. For being a young human, you certainly hold more sensibility than some of the gods I've met. Her tone was calm and collected at this point, if not a bit perplexed. In all her years she never once met a man or woman that would refuse her blessing, let alone have a good reason to do so, to the point she couldn't even be angry about it. I guess I'll put that on the back burner for now then, and instead for my conditions. I will be the one to name the sacred gear, and I will be in charge of your balance breaker. I feel I have the perfect thing in mind for it. A balance breaker effectively is a form that defies the rules of the world. I'd say it will take more than a week for you to learn, but with you, I really believe you could pull it off within 3 days with your potential if you were given a true reason to need that strength, which is ridiculous to be able to admit. Boy, you are a monster in your own right that even the gods will fear one day. She put a finger to her lips, debating saying this next bit or not before just settling on getting it off her chest. Oh, and one last thing, I was listening into you talking to the white cat. You aren't a cruel or merciless bastard, but I feel bad for anyone who actually manages to piss you off enough to snap. That will be the day people witness a true storm. That last bit drew out a wide range of emotions out of the brown-haired boy. Surprise, disgust at himself, a very obvious look of deep thought, a look of realization, and then one of mild fear that dulled his eyes, once more worrying the woman before him, leading to her voice to soften a lot as she asked a simple question. You good? Do you want to talk about it before we get into things? There was a truly long pause. Thankfully for both of them, they were in a space where time moved far slower, so he had all the time in the world, so to speak. He would sit down on the purple floor of her amethyst domain with his hands over his face, clearly with a racing mind, trying his best to think of how to word everything as he'd slowly uncover his visage, revealing an almost vacant stare which caught the woman off guard as his voice came out rather dead and hollow. It was sobering to hear that, and it really does reignite my fear of becoming stronger to a point. I am glad you all think of me as better than I could ever see myself. There was another reveal of what he meant when he told Koneko just how broken he saw himself as. It was rearing its ugly head in the worst of ways, as Boreas was getting a first-hand look at what years upon years of isolation from others and mental trauma had done to the boy. Even if the winds could grant him freedom physically, it wouldn't alleviate the pain in his mind just yet. That was the bumpy road ahead that the white-haired catgirl, now girlfriend, had hinted to. She had seen every bit of the damage done to his mind, and it hurt her. Even if she was within his soul, she had only just woken up and had no idea of the extent of the damage just yet. But this was a pretty clear sign of it as she'd get down to his level, looking into his eyes. Dear boy, I wish you could have awoken me sooner, even if we wouldn't have gotten along with each other as we do now, even if it meant I would have most likely killed you. No one deserves to be alone for that long. I know that better than anyone. I should have been there for my host instead of choosing to remain asleep. The shock of nearly losing you is what woke me by force. Those words of a kindred spirit had struck deep within the amber-eyed boy as life seemed to come back to them all at once as he reached out to hug her. An act that she genuinely hadn't experienced in her life, as she felt such a kind soul pull her, and it was clear either of them had it easy in life, as for the first time in her life, the goddess wept, and the winds within the mindscape had turned into a ferocious storm that threatened to blow away the building they were in. It didn't deter Issei in the slightest as he just pulled her closer, though it did reconfirm his first thought. She was terrifyingly powerful. The woman truly could feel it now. She could understand why the girls around him fell for him with such ease. The same warmth the Nekishu outside of the dream felt, and it was comforting. It was as if the world's cruelty had no place within such a kind boy's heart. That was the sole thought that ran across her mind as his voice broke her train of thought, coming out as a soothing whisper. Boris, I have not and will never blame you for not being there for me. I was too weak to awaken you. I was too pitiful to be worthy of such a place beside another. No, that's not quite right. I guess what I want to say is this. I am thankful to have you here now and for the adventures we will go on together. No self-deprecating bullshit. None of my usual nonsense, as that would be pointless here. The volume of his voice would raise slightly as he spoke to her, clearly doing his best if not awkward attempt to comfort the sobbing woman. Just how do I even put this to words? For weeks, months, even a whole year, I wanted nothing more than to just walk out in front of a truck and see if I go to another world or not. But in the past 24 hours I've been basically invited to a whole new world within my own, and I even gained wings to explore it from such a drop-dead gorgeous goddess. How the fuck can I beat myself into the ground given that chance? I get it, I'm a depressive asshole. It's going to get a lot worse through probable therapy before it gets better, but I am thankful to have you here by my side if the other girls can't be here. I'm sorry for the long-winded rambling. The long and short of it is you all have become the greatest of blessing to me. He would finish off, clearly having tears threatening to spill over at the corners of his eyes. He didn't wish to see the one who gave him such a great gift crying like this as he reached down, gently wiping her tears away with his fingers, finally getting a good look at her close up. His eyes met with hers merely inches away as his breath hitched in his throat. It would seem he was beginning to get a thing for women's eyes as her piercing stare stopped his brain from functioning for a moment, only simply saying, "And here I thought the sky was the deepest blue I'd ever see." Through and through the boy was an absolute lady killer, even if by accident or coincidence. In all her years as a goddess, no one could ever look her in the eye, be it because of her piercing stare or because of fear of her power. Even the other gods couldn't manage it, yet here was a young boy who couldn't even amount to a fraction of her existence doing so fearlessly, and the first damn thing he did was compliment her eyes. Her tears would stop immediately, and she was over the fucking moon, straight to cloud 9. It was an experience she'd never be able to describe. People often thought Artemis was the goddess who hated men the most, but she didn't hold a candle to Boris in the slightest for that regard, and for the first time in her life, she felt her heartbeat increase as her face turned red, or what appeared to be a dark purple, under the visage of her cloak's ability, as her voice came out as a true stuttering mess, screaming like an actual character trope you're all probably all too familiar with. I is Issei, you cannot just do that to a woman. Yo, you are very bad for my heart. You idiot. Ladies and gentlemen, the textbook definition of a tsundere has arrived. He was many things, dense in that regard, unfortunately for her wasn't on that repertoire, as he began turning several shades of red, realizing what he had just done, and right after he got a girlfriend too. He was more glad than anything else that Koneko was asleep and not there for this, as he swiftly let go of her only to get dragged back in with a firm, "And no, I'm not letting go." After hearing that, he just let out a resigned sigh, as he was pretty damn sure he just won another girl's heart. Making a mental note, forgetting she could hear his thoughts. Find a way to get her out of here one day, take her on a nice date to make up for it, was the thought that crossed her mind. To which she was turning hues he couldn't even put a color to, realizing once again, she's literally in his mind. So she heard that before face-palming and yelling, "Artemis, damn it," would slip out in a rather comical fashion, as he had taken that whole patron deity bit to heart now. Scene break, Artemis' room. Something she hadn't told Issei yet, she'd hear anything akin to a prayer or blaspheme against her, which he had mildly just committed, even if it wasn't in a negative light. She had taken to the habit of directly watching over him when she was mentioned. Sure, she wasn't like the biblical god who'd go full fire and brimstone over it, but she'd have to tell him eventually to watch it. Artemis would furrow her brow hearing her name taken in such a manner. She also got a visible glimpse of the situation, so she shook her head, spotting him holding Boris in his arms. Silly boy will be the death of many a woman's defenses. He's far too kind and oblivious of that fact, was all she said as she drifted off to sleep herself. Scene break, back in the mindscape. A cold chill seemed to breeze over Issei, knowing damn well he just did something wrong, feeling like he was spied upon, but he couldn't quite figure it out as he'd shake his head. He'd stare down into the woman before his eyes. So, all the emotional trauma out of the way, you mentioned designing the sacred gear, right? Do you have a name in mind? Because I already have an idea inspired by a show I loved growing up, even if it is a bit cliché. He'd pause for a moment, clearly in deep thought, before he'd continue. And, in due time. I'd like to learn more about you. It seems like your past is probably as dark as mine, if not worse, and I know what bottling that up does to a person. I may not be a therapist or anything, but I am here to listen as you are for me. No need to rush it, as we likely have at bare minimum 80+ years together. She had chosen to address the latter bit before the name drop of her gear, as he was slightly mistaken in that time estimate. You just recently developed ki, senjutsu, whatever you wish to call it. You'll more than likely live a far longer life than you give yourself credit for. And, while you may not be a therapist, I feel you're far better for my heart than one could ever be. She'd give that time to sink in, as he obviously took a mental note down to ask Kuroka about that later, as the goddess would give him a playful wink before her usual seductive sing-song tone finally returned to her. As for the name I wished to be addressed by, I felt this would be the most fitting of all, considering it is you as my first wielder. I chose the name the Wings of Liberation, as you seem to release the shackles upon those around you, myself included, Issei. As long overdue as it may be. That was my sincere first time crying, let alone getting a hug. There was a mild shame in admitting this to him, but she promised herself not to be dishonest with him. It was the least she could do for the boy. She'd stop herself for a moment, trying her best to pull herself back together, as she'd feel that hug tighten around her, to her surprise finding it very relaxing as she continued on. As for the balance breaker, I wanted to do something unique with your permission. I am planning to channel my personal power into it, allowing you to share your balance breaker state with up to 10 people at any given time while in it. The drain on your own reserves will go up more with each person involved. I chose this as the theme, along with a sharp power boost to your own direct affinities on top of whomever you bind with the gear, as I foresee you fighting with a strong enough group to handle such a thing. Other than that fact, I see you in the future wishing to share the skies, even if you are to become the king of it. I can't picture you in a lonely sky. The brunette had taken it all in, beginning to picture riding through the sky with the ones he loved and people he'd yet to meet. It was catharsis by proxy. Her name choice was indeed the best he could have imagined, as his eyes lit up with endless wonder as he spoke like a kid in a candy store. Me? A king? Ha, I'd say it's a laughable notion. But with you and the girls by my side, I might just be able to reach those heights. I did pass your test with flying colors, even if I knocked myself out, right? And I know you heard my thoughts earlier. I'd like to add another thing to that, if it's even possible. I don't know the limits to sacred gears, but I'd like to eventually bring forth a secondary form of a balance breaker with enough effort. Those words were something that kept the goddess in suspense, as he was clearly looking for the words as a light bulb seemed to appear above his head. I want the second awakening of a balance breaker to be able to give you a body. I want to fly through the skies by your side. I don't want to just keep you locked away in such a space while I get to enjoy such freedom. I personally hate and cherish whatever being locked you away in such a form. It's such a conflicting notion, because if it hadn't, I might not have ever met you. But in the same regard, I hate that you're stuck inside of me instead of being free. You were very right about the word liberation, as I refuse to keep you bound inside of me with no way out. There was a certainty to those words, a fire visibly burning in his eyes, brighter than she could have imagined from one so broken, and for her sake no less. If he hadn't done it before, he stole her heart then and there, as she'd physically swoon at the notion. She herself wasn't quite sure about it, but she'd try her best to set up such a feature. The God of the Bible did pretty distinctly say the user's intent would shape things without question, and his intent was as clear as fucking day right there. She'd get her actual body back, even for short time periods. So she gave a small nod with tears of joy running down her face as she hid away in his chest, not wishing to worry him any further, as she'd let him finish off the rest of what he needed to say. As for the form of the gear, I want them to be similar to inline skates. The wheels will be a free-form creation of wind, allowing me to use it for mobility, offense, and defense, as I plan to base my martial arts around kicking, as my legs are, and will always be far stronger than my arms. Especially after that jackass fucked my left arm up. Even if it healed properly, I'm worried I'll freak out trying to block with it. A grimace was visible on his face as he spoke those final words, shaking it off quickly as he'd bring a hand to his chin, clearly thinking it over. As for the general design, I'd like them to amplify wind-based magic and allow me free usage of spells without chance, circles, or whatever may be the prerequisite, if that's possible. Sure, they may not be as strong as the basic methods to use it, but I feel being able to fire off multiple casts of various magic in rapid succession, or in tandem, will be far more useful than simply boosting my already pitiful base stats. His experience across many games and reading various light novels was ironically paying off in dividends to the point he was making the goddess question the methodology that everyone else took into combat. And you're sure you've never been in actual combat before because holy hell, Issei. I've met actual generals who would have put less thought into this. He chuckled softly. Well, I didn't have any friends, so video games and light novels or manga became my best friends. You'd be amazed what humans cook up when they're bored enough or inspired by a fantastic idea. If it weren't too much of a stretch, I'd ask for the gear to be customizable over time too. To both of their shared surprise, a sound in the distance like a game console saving would be heard. It was distinct as could be as they shared a look of did that actually just fucking work? And Issei would sigh deeply. Really, that JRPG? Is it because I'm Japanese? Come on now. There was disbelief and disappointment alongside genuine amusement in his voice. I don't know if I should call you a genius or a dumbass for that last sentence, but I think it actually responded to your wish. You probably have the most diverse and advanced sacred gear beyond the boosted gear now in terms of potential, and people thought constantly doubling your power was broken. There was a sincerity to those words as he stared at the ground before yelling, "Fuck, I could have had something like that." To which the goddess just began laughing her ass off. I think I'm leaning towards dumbass if you didn't consider that. In all truth though, you still have the potential to create something just as broken if not more so. Since it seemed to humor your idea of constantly developing itself further. As a small fact about the Longinus series, the gears themselves actually have a personality even if it's never shown usually. This raised a single eyebrow from Issei. He wasn't slow in the slightest, and hearing that really did bring some questions to mind. Is that why some people would have a harder time bringing you to wake up, so to speak? You make it sound as if the gears themselves are fickle and picky with their hosts. Also, it literally played the save sound from my favorite game. That's neat, I guess? I'm still not sure what to make of happening. She'd give a nod as she'd speak with intent, clearly needing to convey the severity of the situation. That is because they truly are in the case of Longinus gears specifically. Each looks for particular traits in the person. Some won't actually become active in the person's lifetime, or may just outright kill them on the spot beyond the being inside of its own personal wishes. Seems mine likes you. I've heard of examples while in previous hosts who were supernaturally aware of a few of the gears physically destroying entire areas if their host did something unforgivable in its opinion. Only really happens with two of them it seems though. Those two being the telos karma and absolute demise, having this happen as a one-time thing each. So, I don't think it's exactly commonplace, nor do I know why they reacted so violently. All of that being said, standardized sacred gears or unevolved ones that pop up pretty regularly don't have a personality, and most hosts can't even tell that the Longinus gears do unless the beings inside inform them of it. Issei would just slowly nod at that full information dump, seemingly looking around his mindscape. I hope to get along with yours then. It has a neat sense of humor if nothing else. That save sound definitely brought back good memories of my childhood in a way, so hey, if you're listening, thanks. A pretty immediate response would come to this, shocking him slightly. And if nothing else, the gear itself was showing off more than anything as the sky above them seemed to light up with fireworks as a victory fanfare had played, invoking various degrees of nostalgia. The boy would more or less deadpan at this, staring over at Boris. I say this with absolutely no disrespectful intentions. But your gear is a smartass and I love it. The two would just sit there casually watching the fireworks out of the window, admiring the beautiful fire flowers that would slowly burn out as quickly as they came. This would be a memory he'd cherish for as long as he lived, as it more or less commemorated the completion and realization of his sacred gear and first true step into this long journey. Sometime around 7:10, the mansion foyer. Issei had since woken up and gotten up out of bed, making his way out of the room and out the front door with a rather pensive look on his face after the long conversation he had with Boris. Even with the two girls in bed waiting for him inside, he clearly had far too much on his mind that he didn't even know where to begin attempting to address. So he opened the front door to the fresh morning air and took a deep breath before settling out on an idea. The brunette did something he honestly didn't think he had in him. He took a step forward in the right direction and pulled out his phone, calling Sarah Fall as she had told him to do when he needed someone. The phone would go to a dial tone twice before he heard someone pick up on the other end. He could only hope Kuroka and Koneko would be asleep for a while so he could get this out of his mind without worrying either of them. The Mao-gone magical girl seemed absolutely delighted at first to see that he had called when she picked up, but she dropped the usual personality when she heard his voice. It was pretty clear he had a lot to say as she chimed in with a soft and sincere tone. Hey Issei, you good? To which his voice was quiet and shaky at best, like he was bordering on breaking down due to the overwhelming pressure of the night before. Hey. Saratan, are you, able to talk currently? I'm not interrupting you in anything, right? I hate to be a bother, but, I need someone to talk to about a few things, and you were the only one I could turn to. Koneko and Kuroka are both asleep. And, well, there's a ton I need to discuss to the point I don't even know where to begin or if I can even tell you some of it. And I need your sincere promise that this stays between us. I want to trust you, but I can't trust easily. I'm sorry to ask this of you. I want you to explain this to your sister too later so I don't have to repeat this a second time. Much to his surprise, a circle would open up and out would step the magical girl herself, dragging the boy down into a tight hug. Of course you have my word, and I will gladly inform Sonatan as per your request. I promise you one-on-one that what is said won't leave our conversations. What's on your mind, Issei? I told you before, I am here for you. I'd normally put on the whole bubbly persona, but it seems that it'd do more harm than good currently. Especially if it's something so serious you're questioning if you can even directly tell me of it. Did something bad happen? She had a peculiar look as she could clearly smell the scent of two different perfumes coming off of him, which raised a question. Were you sleeping with the two cat girls, Issei? Seems you've made some progress there, and sorry for sidetracking you. Please talk to me. To that remark, he turned a few shades of red, giving a soft nod. I think she'd be fine with me telling you. I started dating Koneko. It was sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing, and we were both on quite the emotional high at the time. But she makes me feel safe, she makes me feel loved when even my own parents didn't do either of those. I'd sooner end the world than make her cry if I have a say in the matter. That is what I've set in my mind. And I think I may actually have the power to do that in due time after what I discovered about myself. He'd let out a somewhat dark laugh. It was clear he didn't mean it as a threat to anyone, but with his tone it'd be hard to know that. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself, as too many dark thoughts of revenge were going through his head. A knowing look spread across the woman's features as she knew that look far too well after dealing with the Civil War. Her voice came across as a hardened veteran. Revenge will make you feel better for the moment, but hate breeds hate. I'm a devil, I'd know this better than anyone since we revel in sin time to time. Wrath and pride are quite dangerous, you know, Issei. Never let power go to your head. There was a very deep pause as those words stuck with Issei, as he honestly understood them far deeper and closely than she'd ever know, well. For the moment. In the past he'd nearly been expelled for fighting back, even though it only made things worse for him. He had witnessed what human pride and status looked like, so he could only imagine how bad it would be with devils. He seemed to shake his head from side to side at that thought, as he clearly made his mind up over something major. He pulled back in the hug, standing before her as his gaze seemed to change. His amber eyes temporarily flashed a hue reminding her of her own sisters, but far deeper and more dangerous. The very air itself actively whipped around them in that moment, like a gale had began, stopping as quickly as it began. His voice came out steady and slow. I possess a sacred gear, a Longinus that isn't exactly on the record. I pray this doesn't leave our one-on-one conversation here. Because I'm pretty sure Boris would lose her fucking mind and go after all parties involved simply because my trust was betrayed again. I'm telling you this with the utmost of trust, as Mao Leviathan beyond just Seraphal. If I am to understand your title correctly. Oh, and she's a female in case devils have it wrong too. Rather not have her try to possess me or something if that's possible. Alarm bells unlike any other were going off in the woman's mind hearing that name. As a child she was warned of tales from the older generations of what would happen if you angered the one by that name. She stared at him with a varying range of emotions flashing across her face. Shock, surprise, awe, and finally understanding to some extent were the ones the brown-haired boy could pick out. Her tone turned deathly serious, and a barrier immediately brought up around them so no one could possibly listen in. And who else is aware of this? You should have warned me before dropping something like that in my lap. Let alone said that out loud. Satan knows who could have been listening in. The supernatural world is far more deadly than you think. Please, exercise more caution even if you feel you can trust me. Believe me, I am thankful you trust me enough to tell me this, even if it confuses me slightly as to why you would do so. I am sure you understand how dangerous that information is. His eyes had shifted back to their usual brown, a distinct softness seen through them as he'd let out a soft laugh. Call it instinct of a broken man, much like your sister. Neither of you doubted me for even a moment upon meeting me, and you only tried to do right by me. I have met many people. even if I foolishly tried to put my trust in some of them. But you and the girls all seem to just have the best of intentions for me. If I can't reciprocate that to some degree, nothing will ever change for me, and I'll just end up back in that hole I'm slowly crawling out of." He doubled back on her question with a sigh as he spoke slowly. "Out of the other three who are aware, it'd be my kitten, her sister, and Artemis. They were all within my soul, mind, dream thing." He wasn't sure how to explain it at all, though he'd cough awkwardly as he'd go to continue what he had to say. "They suddenly appeared when Boris challenged me to a race for the right to become a candidate for the position of the King of the Sky, apparently. I thought it was the right to use the sacred gear, but no. It was interesting, honestly. I've never felt so free, and I think I will use this newfound ability to protect those who protected me, yourself included, Seraphal. I also managed to awaken Ki. I'll be going to Kyoto to train under the person who trained Kuroka and Shirin. According to Kuroka, this has never happened before, and someone named Azazel. I'm sorry, I'm awful with weird names. But yeah? She said they'd lose their mind knowing this happened." She was intently listening, with her eyes sparkling to a varying degree, hearing someone actually will occupy that title once again beyond who was regarded as a mad goddess. "That would explain the whole fiasco I witnessed. You sent waves of panic through heaven as their sacred gear system started going wild trying to detect what was happening. It was kind of comical seeing them skitter around through my scrying orb. I am guessing it only had parameters for the primary 13 Longinus." She'd remark with a devilish smirk, clearly implying she keeps tabs on heaven, which would raise a few questions for Issei for later. The boy only raised an eyebrow before simply stating, "That's mildly disconcerting, not going to lie to you. But, this is what I figured out so far with the gear. It's going to be rather overpowered if I can design it well enough over time." Once more, he said something baffling to the magical girl clad in pink. Her voice was mystified, and she was truly wide-eyed as she gasped before whispering, "Did you just say design, as in, you chose how your sacred gear would form?" This was news that would shake the fundamental understanding of the entire existence of the tools. To which Issei absent-mindedly continued to destroy anything she knew about them. "Well, yeah? That's exactly what I did. As no one before me was ever able to truly awaken Boris without being killed. I was able to discuss with her, and the sacred gear itself, of what I wanted it to become over time." A bewildered and perplexed stare was her only answer, as she spoke very slowly. "Over time? Are you telling me it can evolve beyond basic liberation forms?" She had far more knowledge on sacred gears as she talked to Azazel time to time on it, as he once more dropped the mother of all bombshells. She had very good rapport and a soul-binding contract with the man, after all, not to betray each other due to circumstances in the war. Issei would begin to speak once more, his tone very matter-of-fact. "Yes, that, and the sacred gear itself is sentient. Well, actually, all of the Longinus series are, according to Boris. It even directly responded to my words in a tangible manner. And, I more or less made it so that it can evolve based on my impact, training, and wishes. I wish I had considered something like the boosted gear's doubling ability. Didn't learn about that until after the fact." He'd admit with some visible regret on his face. The look on Seraph's face could speak a trillion words as she'd simply asked a single question. "May I call a friend in for this? He needs to know you can trust him. If he were to do something I'd view as betrayal, I'd kill his entire race." To which Issei would give a small nod, surprising her further. It caught her so off guard that he'd let her do this that the woman actually dropped her wand only to catch it, as she swiftly looked like she dialed onto it, and a man appeared from a circle within the barrier. He had a mix of black and blonde hair with a piercing gaze, wearing a bleed-red overcoat with black slacks, looking far more than slightly groggy. He began asking a single question before realizing someone else was there. "The hell do you want, Seraphal? You know that number is for emergencies, ONL. Hello, who are you, boy? Why the hell was I dragged out of bed this early for Big G's sake? Oh, where are my manners? I am Azazel." He changed what he was going to say so he didn't give his friend a migraine, as he would stretch a hand out to the brunette, clearly trying to get a read on them. As Issei had taken their hand in his, the fallen angel would have the most shocked a look, as he seemed to see the being he knew to fear on the same level as Ophis, and Great Red itself peering out from behind the boy, and what felt to be the most dangerous, a pulsive key being unconsciously emitted in response to his own power. His face hardened, and he took this far more serious than he normally would as he yelled out while stumbling back of sheer shock. "Who the actual hell are you introducing me to, Seraphal? What kind of monster is he?" The scream was loud enough for Issei to recoil back, covering his ears, and he sat with his elbows to his knees as his eyes went very distant yet wild in the same regard. There was a distinct lack of focus as he receded into a shell. A painfully clear sign of PTSD to what first appeared to be the screaming, as it took him a good 5 minutes to recover. But it was in truth the word monster alongside the raised tone of voice that actually hurt Issei. He began to cry and shake violently as it clearly triggered a very dark, usually forcibly repressed memory of his. In the back of his head he heard it playing out again and again. Scene break. A flashback, middle school principal's office. It was like a projector was playing it over everything going on around him, only to Issei's perspective being forced to relive it in its entirety. Listen here, you insufferable monster, how dare you beat our child? All he did was take a toy from you, it's not like he was going to keep it. You broke his fucking arm over something so worthless? Your parents should have just never had you, you cruel bastard child. The woman was screaming loud enough to shake the door behind her. A older-looking woman was berating a barely 6th grade Issei who had gotten the tar beaten out of him by said boy earlier. He was still sporting a black eye and a missing tooth over the issue. He finally had enough and picked up a chair and had hit the kid as hard as he could to take back his property from the bully. It was one of 3 gifts he had ever received from his grandfather that his parents actually let him keep that hadn't been stolen by the boy. The thoughtless old bitch actually snapped the action figure in half then, and they're causing Issei to begin bawling his eyes out as for the first time they lost any shine they had. It was the last thing he had given to him by the man who looked up to his broken for no reason, and the principal didn't even bother reprimanding the woman as her husband held major stock in the school. Even if he did feel bad for the boy. In his eyes there was nothing he could do. This was Issei's first true experience with the difference of wealth could bring in people's interactions, and it was the true moment things began to spiral out of control for the boy. Scene break, back with Azazel, Issei and Seraphol. A sad look was all the governor of the fallen angels could offer him. He knew that response far too well. His tone softened to that of a father talking to his child. He had vast experience with cases like this after the war. Boy, I am very sorry, are you okay? I apologize for using such a word thoughtlessly, you're clearly not a monster. I was scared honestly, you hold so much power for one so young that it caught me by surprise. Seraphol called me here to meet you and all I've done is upset you. For that, I sincerely apologize. He reached down, gently placing a hand on the brown mop of hair in front of himself, gently rubbing their head, just giving them time to work through those thoughts. As he was comforting the boy, he opened an immediate telepathic link to Seraphol. There was a sincere rage to the tone of his voice as he did his best to keep a calm mask as to not stress the boy any further than he clearly was. What the actual fuck happened to a child to have him this broken? I have seen actual soldiers less traumatized. And why did you summon me? You know how dangerous it is to pull me into this territory unannounced. The Leviathan offered a sad smile, looking over at Issei as she responded. I wouldn't have the time to be able to tell you all of that. I am choosing to look over this boy alongside many others. As for why you were summoned, it was that goddess I'm sure was glaring daggers at you. That is his sacred gear. He claimed it's a Longinus that wasn't in heaven's catalog. And that Longinus gears were sentient. That his sacred gear had been designed by himself, and he knows exactly how it will evolve. This stays between us or I'll burn the Grigori down by myself. Am I fucking clear, Azazel? A single reply came to her from the man with a mild hint of fear. Crystal clear. There was a stare of cold fury he hadn't seen since various wars in her eyes. He knew damn well his friend was deathly serious, and beyond that, there was the fact she actually believed him in his claims. It pretty genuinely took Seraphol walking up behind Issei and dragging him into a hug for him to snap out of the state he was in as she gently sang to him. It was the theme song to her show, but she knew he liked the show, so she hoped it'd help nonetheless after another minute past that. The boy rose to his feet, taking a small bow, Seraphol still holding him from behind and with a quaking voice. I do apologize for that, but please don't yell suddenly like that again and use the M word. I can deal with either individually, but both together bring back some bad days. And for the record, my name is Issei Hayato, not boy. He offered a somewhat playful smile, trying his best to recover. There was a solemn nod from the man in the trench coat as he'd sigh loudly. I should have put more thought into my tone and volume I spoke. It was incredibly unprofessional. But seeing Boris of all people staring me down once more after witnessing what she did to her previous host scared the absolute shit out of me. Hayato, you don't realize just how feared and revered that goddess is. Shiva, the literal god of destruction himself, would never try fighting her. His face scrunched slightly, realizing that the one before him was human, and he probably wouldn't grasp the severity, only to have a shocked look on his face. The boy called out excitedly, "Wait, Shiva actually exists? I've seen him in so many JRPGs and all." It was as if the shaking and pain washed away as he spoke of such things, which amused as if that entire outburst hadn't just happened. Azazel was an avid gamer himself, so that drew a soft smirk to his lips. He took note of that should he never need to talk the boy down. Issei continued on that train of thought he had wanted to earlier by saying something mind-blowing to the fallen angel. "I heard a particular save tone come from the sacred gear when I was inside of it, when I was describing what I wanted it to do over time too. It has an amusing personality." He would mimic the prying chime, letting Azazel know what he meant. As if to respond to his words, he began gently levitating off the ground, lifting the Mao who was hugging him still along with him as the winds began to form what looked like wheels under the very defined metal-plated skates of the darkest of purple hue in color. They were both intimidating and sharp-looking by all means. As if greaves were converted into inline skates with deep-set blue gems adoring a few set locations along them that glowed with power. The next thing that occurred only further confirmed what he was saying, as he hadn't shown any signs a sacred gear user puts forth without training, which is a rarity. It was evident they had just summoned themselves and began working as natural as breathing, which was abnormal beyond all means. The boy had felt the one who was still hugging him fall off his back, seeming to invert himself instantly as he was more than 15 feet off the ground, dashing down with a motion that looked like skating on the air, catching her in his arms as he'd right himself, now holding the obviously blushing magical girl staring up at him as if he were a prince on a white horse from stories of old. Even going as far to carry her bridal style as Shirin had him last night. His voice was soft-spoken as he glanced down at her. "My apologies, can't let you fall like that, even if it wouldn't hurt you. It would get your wonderful outfit dirty, and that could ruin your shoots, right? I should have paid more attention to my surroundings." "You okay, Saratan?" He laughed pretty awkwardly since she didn't say a word, just staring at him with endless wonder in her eyes. Once again, the accidental lady killer struck hard. Down below him, however, he could feel eyes locked on his feet with every motion as he descended, attempting to set her on the ground, only to find Seraph's arms locking around him as she took on her usual spoiled and childish tone. "You take me through the sky like a princess, please? This is a request from your favorite magical girl. You wouldn't let a lady down, right?" She would call to him with the biggest of puppy dog eyes that could fell the most cold-hearted a man. He was unknowingly fulfilling a dream she's had since she was a child. Azazel, clearly amused by this all happening, would snap his fingers, instantly expanding the barrier far larger than it was, giving him far more room to move, making sure that no one around would see them flying around as the boy let out a defeated sigh, knowing damn well he wouldn't win this one. He just simply nodded twice over to Azazel before carefully beginning to dance through the sky with her in his arms. There was a distinct grace and fluidity to his motions as he began speeding up, letting her really enjoy the ride as the wind gently blew her hair just about everywhere. This went on for around 10 or 15 minutes, as they just enjoyed the skies together. A soft whisper came out of her, barely audible at best. "So this is what it's like to fly without wings. Such freedom. It's relaxing. Thank you, my broken prince." A single thought went through her mind. "Guess I can't tell Sona about everything from this visit, huh? She'd be so jealous, heh." She knew he didn't hear what she had said. But her blush only intensified worse from the thought of keeping this a secret as the jaunt through the air came to a close, both now on solid ground, as the gear once more vanished with a deep purple poof of energy. To Azazel's surprise, the cloud formed the word, "Goodbye," right before his very eyes in bold letters, underline and all. Azazel would whistle before calmly talking to Issei. "A sacred gear just told me goodbye. Well, that right there is definite proof to what you said. And really, you seriously designed them based on that anime? That's such an odd idea, but I can respect it. I'd love to come study them in greater depth come later." He clearly had a knowing grin plastered across his face as he'd stepped down on one knee, mirroring a particular scene as the grass beneath his foot would shoot up in every direction from wind magic, giving Issei the hint he fully knew where it was from as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card, handing it to the boy. There was a vast level of joy and enthusiasm to the boy's eyes as he recognized that fact. "Respect for that one, not many people I know are even aware it exists," was all he said as he turned to Sarah, who was still a blushing mess. He reached out, gently placing a hand to her forehead. "You good? You're burning up." It's not that he couldn't take the hint, he just wanted to mess with her in that moment, as he gave her a sly grin. Azazel took a bow with a chuckle at the romantic comedy playing out before himself as the poor woman's brain seemed to short-circuit at how directly he called her out as the man would duck out before she possibly exploded on the boy. A deep crimson circle appeared at his feet as he'd vanished from the location back to the Grigori. Issei could almost sense the two stirring from their sleep as he'd reach out and hug Serafal. Hey, thanks for today, even if it feels like you did more harm than good from me breaking down earlier. I am glad to have you in my corner, so to speak. Growing up, no one, and I mean literally no one, not even my parents, defended me or were considerate of my breakdowns, going as far as to accuse me of faking depression. He'd offer her a genuine smile even as he talked of something so painful, clearly having come to trust her even if just a bit from their interactions today. She herself took a bow with her usual childish voice that you could swear you'd see accented hearts and stars popping off were it a comic. Not to fear, my young fan. I, magical girl Leviathan, will always be here by your side in your time of need. As she said this, she comically poofed away in the most anime-esque manner possible with a giant pink cloud of smoke. The smoke was visibly cleaning up any bit of mess they would have left behind, dropping the barrier to boot. It was purely for theatrics, but he enjoyed it nonetheless as he muttered, "It seems this is what having family or loved ones is like. What an odd feeling. I like it though. Azazel was nice too. I hope I can come to trust many people. Being alone sucks." He had pretty genuinely forgotten this feeling after losing his grandparents. Scene break. Inside of Koneko's room. Sometime around 7:40-ish, the mansion foyer entryway. Shirin had woken up far sooner than expected due to a pretty horrendous nightmare of the other day, of what would or could have happened if she hadn't reached the brown-haired boy in time, waking up in a very cold sweat, freaking out. And unfortunately for her nerves, there was a distinct lack of her new boyfriend to be found in the bed. So, she did what any Nico Mata would do and began sniffing the air and trying to sense his presence. Something horrified her in that moment, as she could tell he went towards the entrance, but his scent completely vanished without a trace suddenly as she sprung out of bed, getting dressed with the spell. She ran through the halls like a bat out of hell with thunderous footfalls, muttering the same thing over and over. It came out louder and louder as a strange cadence began coming into it, growing into a scream of desperation that would wake her sister, who followed after, barely keeping up with the white-haired gal. No, and why? Sprinting so fast her feet physically dug gouges out of the floor as she ran for the front door, only to see it slowly turning and opening, revealing the very same boy in front of her. A special kind of relief washed over her as she launched herself at him. Just as he turned on his heel, walking into the house only to get pounced by a very panicked Shirin. One thing he hadn't accounted for was the possibility the barrier would hide his presence from her, and she couldn't sense him when she woke up, leading to her tackling him like a white-eared missile. Her mind went to the worst possibilities after his stunt the other day, and she clung into him with tears in his eyes as she whimpered and spoke with a mewling voice. Please, don't go away. Don't leave me behind, please." She was damn near begging through cries as her voice broke. "New York night like that. I thought someone kidnapped you or hurt you." There was a distinctly cat-like cadence to her words that only really came out if she was deeply panicked. It was a character quirk that Issei found relatively adorable, even if it broke his heart hearing her breaking down like this. She quickly calmed down, feeling the boy slowly stroking her head. She hadn't had time to warn him of the fact she'd become emotionally bonded to him as a mate with all but the mark established. And yokai are very intense when it comes to how they fall for their lovers. He definitely took note of her intensity of her fear though. Kuroka quickly rounded the corner, desperately screaming and panting from having to sprint like that after just waking up from a dead sleep. "Shirin, what the fuck is going on?" Only to see her wrapped around Issei like a blanket, damn near with how firmly she was embracing him as she looked at him, very puzzled at the sight. Did she have a nightmare or something? Was the first thought that came to mind as she let out a relieved sigh, walking up to them. The older sister took a deep breath before asking, "Why is she so freaked out?" She bolted out of bed, running faster than I've ever seen. There was sheer terror in her voice, like her very heart was being ripped away from her body. To which Koneko muttered quickly, "Couldn't feel him, couldn't smell him. Thought he was taken. Nightmares of him dying." The realization hit Kuroka like a ton of bricks as she winced, though a thought crossed her mind. How the hell could he hide himself? And to that thought, Issei seemed to have read her very mind. "Serafal came to visit when I called her, and she put up a barrier because we discussed my sacred gear, as I didn't plan to hide it from her or Sona." That had answered just about everything she needed to know as she brought 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose, gently squeezing as she spoke in a frustrated tone. "You should have ran that by me before talking to her about that. while she is trustworthy. That info is dangerous, Issei. I fully understand you are new to the whole supernatural and all. But if we had woken up before we did, there is a very high chance we would have attacked that barrier suspecting you were getting kidnapped. Just be more mindful with your actions, please. Leave a note or something next time. We as yokai have very intense emotions. And it can lead to how Shirin is currently quite easily under the wrong circumstances. He would give her a peace sign, playfully trying to lighten the mood as if to confirm he understood, with a warm smile as he nuzzled up under the white cat girl's chin to force her to look up at him. She was his current priority above all else, though he understood Kuroka's words entirely. His voice came across as soft and soothing as he spoke. Hey, my lovely white kitten, your prince is right here. It's fine now, I'll chase the bad dreams away next time. I'm not going anywhere like that, okay? I will become strong enough that no one can take me away from you. To which he had some very deep golden pools staring back at him as she flushed a deep red. As sorry for tackling you running at full speed. I can imagine that had to hurt. It had indeed, but he never would admit it to her. Instead of complaining though, as he heard some soft music playing from a nearby room, he just scooped her up into his arms, carefully bringing her legs around his lower stomach area carefully, and slowly dancing around the foyer's main hall, further embarrassing her in plain view of her sister, as he thought this would be the best way to calm her down. And honestly, it worked like a damn charm. It was the single most romantic thing a guy could have done in Kuroka's eyes. His actions lead to her musing a single thought. How is such a broken man so damn smooth? Poor boy's gonna end up with a whole army of women chasing him if he does this for others. Though, with as strong as he'll become, it's no surprise, I guess, not knowing he indeed had done something similar to Sarah Fall not even 20 minutes earlier. She let, after a few minutes of him, I'm glad you didn't get taken. It's very common for sacred gear users to get harmed in some way if they can't defend themselves. Also, I am sorry for this. She'd lean in, biting down onto his shoulder, shamelessly marking him as hers as a small white cat paw seemed to appear where she bit down. Her instincts were screaming at her to do it. To which Issei would immediately wince, whisper, shouting, "Oh, what the fuck was that for?" As to not alert Kuroka's sensitive hearing to what just happened, as he did his best to stay calm, clearly slightly freaked out from that. Suddenly, it was like he could feel her thoughts. Every ounce of affection behind the action showed plainly on his face as he just stared, confused as she would explain it as best she could while fumbling her words a bit, still missing a good bit of important information on it. I marked you as my mate. That way I can find you even through most BA barriers. I didn't want to experience fear like that again. And I wanted to let the world know that you are Mimine. The usually confident catgirl was an absolute stuttering mess, to the point he couldn't even stay mad at her. She seemed to pull herself together just enough to finish out the other important info that she could muster. It also lets you feel what I'm feeling from a distance. Because I don't want you to feel alone again. He was truly overcome with emotion in that moment. Every single bit of his being told him to just praise her, to love her, to cherish her and treat her better than any words would convey the meaning of. As to his intent, his lips crashed against hers, kissing her then and there, with his eyes drifting shut, holding her as close to him as he could. It may not be the same as marking her, but it was the closest he could get, and she admired that passion melting into the kiss. In the distance, there was a particular bunny girl watching the whole scene unfold as she dashed off, informing her young lady of what happened, causing Kuroka to let out a silent cheer. Seems you finally found someone worth a damn by your standards, sis. Issei and Koneko had finally managed to pry themselves away from each other, as they felt a particular presence making itself known in the dining room waiting for them, becoming somewhat impatient. Artemis could surely sense that her follower had been marked, not that she'd say anything about it, though it was causing a distinct nagging in the back of her mind. A mild root of jealousy had definitely reared its ugly mug, only to be beaten down and ripped out just as quickly as it tried to arrive by the knowledge he wouldn't mistreat her like other men had. Scene break. Inside of the dining room. Somewhere between 8:10 and 8:20 a.m. She knew they were probably off flirting, judging by the hints she had picked up on by Kuroka's delighted demeanor, constantly tossing glances over towards the door as she set down 2 pieces of cake that both said, "Congrats, lovebirds." As she shot Artemis a knowing grin. Seems all 3 of us are stuck in that boat together given time. Who knows who else will fall for him? To which the goddess gave the most indignant stare, not wanting to be called out like that, with a rosy hue to her cheeks. How the hell would you even begin to guess what? To which the black cat shrugged with a curious yet knowing stare. You've watched the boy longer than any of us. Which means you've also seen him naked more than likely, Nyahaha. As if the poor goddess wasn't already embarrassed to be called out, she did a full-on spit take of legendary proportions, choking on the tea she was sipping. How dare you assume that? In the back of her mind she was screaming, even if you are right, fuck you cat. Outwardly she was glaring daggers, which was more than enough to sell the idea to the black-haired Nekishu, who was just tossing rocks into the pond to see which would land a hit. And damn, she hit a fun jackpot of a fish for dinner, so to speak. Perverted virgin goddess, Nyan. Staring at a young boy, how devilish. To which Artemis actually lost her temper and threw a knife straight into the wall inches before her face turning a very loud eep, causing the girl to stumble backwards into a chair as the now very angry goddess rose up over her, quietly whispering down a simple threat. Say a word to Issei or your sister, and I'll introduce your stomach to my arrow through your ass, using Gungnir as an arrow, literally. To say her point was driven home firmly couldn't do it justice, as the normally snarky Nico would very swiftly make a mental note to never fucking do that again, as she'd immediately railroad the conversation elsewhere. Noted, not gonna do that again. Curious of how you'd get the spear to a point. Not so keen on finding it inside of me like that though. I'm kinky but not trying to die over my desires. The enraged goddess had the wind ripped out of her sails just as quickly as they blew to full mast, with an annoyed grumble going back to her seat, her voice coming out with a distinct venom mixed with civility to it. Glad we're clear on this. And thank you for the meal. She would conjure a new knife using a small cantrip, not bothering to get a new one otherwise, as she'd go about cutting up a stack of pancakes as Shirin and Issei slowly came in, taking a seat next to her. The brunette was the first to speak up. Cake for breakfast, Artemis, damn it Kuroka. He had clearly read it as he spotted the other piece of cake flying towards Kuroka at what could only be described as close enough to the speed of sound, physically exploding all over her by a very reddened Koneko. To which Artemis would shoot him a side-eyed glare. Second time Issei, you know better. To which he chuckled out loud. My bad. Didn't know it was such a sin, my goddess. He was clearly just messing with her, as he'd offer her one of the egg rolls from his plate as an apology, and pseudo-offering which she graciously accepted, all the while turning several shades of red on that note. Off to the side, Kuroka was actually out cold. That cake straight railed her chin with enough force to KO her on the spot. The head maid was wondering what was taking the black cat so long to return back to the kitchen, only to find one hell of a mess glancing between her and Koneko with a soft sigh. Really? I spent all morning making those 2 cake slices. To her delight, she could see Issei eating his as he split it down the middle, giving half to his white cat as they both happily ate. I can't even stay mad, this is bullsh, MH. I'm a maid. I need to watch my language. She'd let out an audible sigh as she'd clap her hands together twice. A spell prepped on the room took place, beginning to clean up the absolute splash zone of a mess the other cake had become, going as far as cleaning the unconscious Nikomata entirely, as she walked up, gently shaking the catgirl to wake her up so she could eat too, as they all sat around eating in relative silence. Issei finally spoke up to break the awkward tension in the air. So I know you might have realized it by now, but me and Koneko have officially started dating. There was a very loud roar of cheers from some of the maids and servants in the back, as a true and genuine smile had plastered itself firmly against his face as he pulled her close before he took a breath after drinking the rest of his milk before speaking again, having smashed down an entire 2 plates of food. After everyone is done, we should go to the mall, right? Are we going to a normal store or one ran by folks of your nature? The less chance to run into students from the school, the better it is to me. Rather not let someone petty ruin my day. Though if we run into the 2 from the Kendo Club, I'd hope you'll let me thank them. Not everyone from school is completely bad. There was a seeming nod of understanding from all 3 as Artemis chimed in on this one. I will be setting up a barrier around us so that we won't run into anyone from the school outside, with the exception of those 2 in that case. I'd rather not, publicly unilive someone if I lose my temper. She very much so whispered that last bit, showing she had completely contemplated murdering a few of the students. Most likely a particular perverted duo, mused Issei in his head as a shiver ran down his spine. Due to the murderous aura running high though through the room, to the point his drink actually froze. It was an implied and shared thought by the 2 catgirls to boot, as they radiated the same before he got up and hugged the 3. Murder is regretfully illegal, otherwise I'd probably had solved a lot of problems with it. So, please try to calm yourselves, we still need to go to the mall. They all more or less melted into the hug, seeming to let out a group sigh as Kuroka mumbled something akin to, "You are far too kind, Issei." Issei could be seen off to the side texting Sona asking about the two from the kendo club, only to find out they actually work at the mall in the main sports store to get cheaper equipment for the girls there, and he made a mental note to go visit them. Scene break, the mall entryway. Around 9:15 a.m., the mall was just starting to open up to the public. It had indeed taken them far longer to arrive than planned as they went by car, driven by one of the butlers at the mansion instead of teleporting, as they just wanted a more casual and relaxed morning rather than waiting around for the mall to open up. Our favorite brown-haired boy would take a bow between the three there before he spoke. I made some small plans while we're here outside of getting supplies if you all don't mind. I wanted to try to reach out and thank the two who actually tried to help me. I talked to Sona and found out they work here. A part of him genuinely was worried he'd offend them, or they'd feel he was going to meet other girls or some petty high school nonsense that most girls get upset over in most cases. To his surprise, he got a mature answer rather than childish bickering. First came from ARTEMIS. It's good to try to establish a footing with people. I'm proud of you, Issei. I think this is the first time beyond us that you're actively reaching out since I've watched over you. Next came Kuroka, who answered with a smile. It's not like you're actively cheating on my sister or something stupid. You just want to thank someone who helped you. Naya. And last but not least was Koneko, who'd kiss him softly before speaking. Dear, it's a good thing for you to cherish those who treat you well. Be sure to give them a gift if this meeting goes well. Okay? Issei was once more given a firm reminder that he was blessed with some of the sweetest girls he could fathom, the idea of meeting right by his very side. Scene break, the sports store. Around 9:25 a.m., the mall was huge, so it took them a bit to get there. With those thoughts fresh in his mind, for the first time in a very long time, it wasn't a mask showing a beautiful smile back to them as they made their way through the mall, casually talking about the trip coming up. The fact he was actually genuinely smiling, that wasn't lost on any of the three as they'd carefully escort him to the store. The three of them were actively standing guard outside of the entryway, preventing random folks, let alone students from their school, from just waltzing in due to the intensity of their aura. They were setting up the perfect circumstances to go talk to the kendo duo, and it was all for his sake. The two were actively going through stocking the shop for the morning at the last possible second as one of the boxes from the upper shelves began to fall just above the two. It's not like they ever would have spotted it, leading to a particular brown-haired boy rushing and leaping over them, clearing them by a surprising margin, and by no less of a miracle seeming to land on his feet, all thanks to a particular mix of his new sacred gear, and the ki coursing through his veins like fucking adrenaline at that sight. There was a true mix of shock, horror, and awe seeing the boy they tried so desperately to defend actually come to their rescue, no less than a true knight in shining armor in Murayama's eyes. Those golden amber orbs seemed to damn near pop out of her face as she completely realized what had just happened, looking like she was going to faint. The pinkette wasn't holding up much better as her legs had completely gone out from under her. Those reddish-brown eyes were quite wide as she simply said what was on her mind. How the hell did he? She couldn't even finish the thought as her mind was racing. She knew that box weighed a good 75 pounds, and a boy who looks like he couldn't even lift that standing just leaped through the air and landed without hurting himself as he'd set it down with an audible thud. He rather awkwardly scratched the back of his head as he'd admit, I was just trying to push you two out of the way. Guess I jumped slightly too high. In all honesty, that went far better than I expected it to. I was thinking I'd just get hit by the box. The two were beginning to turn red before a sight brought a pretty genuine confusion and horror across their faces. He'd let out an awkward chuckle before taking a deep bow before them in a position similar to a dejected or something damn near identical. It made no sense to them seeing this, as he had just literally saved them from presumably pretty awful injuries weeks before a major event. His voice came out quiet and shaky. This was hard for him, in truth, to the point he couldn't look up nor look them in the eyes. I want to thank you both, on a sincere and personal level. Thank you too for being one of maybe 5 or 6 other people who actually believed me. I was just trying to help that day as I didn't want the other guys peeking in on you. I can't stand that kind of bullshit going on. After hearing that, they were both completely stunned, trying to process what all had happened. It was far too much for the pink-haired gal who'd just walk up beside him, sitting carefully on the ground as she could tell he wouldn't be raising himself from that pose anytime soon. She waved her friend over, who likewise took a seat next to him as they'd attempt and succeed at sitting him up facing them. It was plain as day to them what all the shit happening at school had done to the boy. Neither came from exactly the best backgrounds when it came to emotional stability or trust. Kate was the first to speak, and boy did she have a lot to say. Her hands came up to her temples as she'd rubbed them slowly. For starters, never bow to us like that. We are your peers and probably one day your friends. Especially after the stunt you just pulled, there is no way I'd assume you're like the guys from our school. We could tell you were trying to fix the hole that day, as you only looked at the girls in the eyes regardless of how terrified you were of getting hit. That takes a certain kind of bravery or apathy to do, and currently I'm not sure which it is from you since you're so damn hard to get a read on. She would seem deeper in thought as she finished off what she had to say. And if nothing else, I now owe you big time for saving me, literally. You may not realize it, but it takes so much more effort to reach out and save someone than it does to freeze up and watch something happen. So, for both then and now. Thank you, Hayadu. No, Issei. Murayama seemed to share her sentiment, as she was nodding along, listening slowly. When she heard her friend finish talking, she decided to embarrass her best friend, if not ever so slightly. What she didn't tell you about is the fact we both honestly cried ourselves to sleep that night after we couldn't find you that day. We were feeling like our club actually ruined the life of the one boy who gave a damn about us girls. Or the fact she fell for you due to your kindness. Kate has been watching you for quite a long time now. She spotted you going around helping people in the few days before school actually started, so she automatically gave you the benefit of the doubt on the issue. This had shocked the brown-haired boy to the point he was speechless, just staring at them both. In that moment he decided he would do something for them as a sincere thank you, but that thought was quickly interrupted when he spotted the poor pink-haired girl turning redder than a sports car. The brown-haired girl would laugh as she got straight up punched, only seeming to laugh harder now, gently holding her sides with one arm, the other nursing her arm where she got hit. It was an awkward few minutes after the laughter stopped, as Issei had fallen into the deepest of thought as he'd call over to Diana, regarded as one of the school beauties. Addressing her by first name as he turned to the three who now sat with him. Diana, I need to get some wood from your parents' forest later, okay? I'm going to make some bakken for these two to commemorate our friendship, as old-fashioned as that may be. I want to honor the gesture of kindness they have given me. The way he said that, it was a nod to his old man who long since passed. Artemis was absolutely taken aback by this. She knew in the past he had made many things with his grandfather, bows, swords, even learned blacksmithing to a point he could rival some master blacksmiths. That old man was an absolute badass in that particular goddess's eyes. She gave a slight nod as she looked over to the pinkette and brunette with a coy smile as she'd call out, "To have such a gift. It'll probably be better quality than anything this store can make. He's talented beyond words when it comes to crafting weapons and metalwork. A talent he rarely shows to anyone." To further prove a point, Diana reached down into her dress, slowly lifting out a beautifully crafted necklace. It clearly depicted Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, holding a bow in one hand and a torch in the other. The biggest difference between the woman before the two and the one on the small rectangle sheet of metal was her burning red hair and auburn eyes in the painting so painstakingly etched into it. This was a gift from Issei. It wasn't a lie. This was his first ever offering to the gods, an idea he had gotten from his eccentric grandpa. When he was told to depict a god or goddess by the old man, it was instinctual to a point, as he hadn't known who he was praying to, but when he thought of all the gods and goddesses, he had realized Artemis was the one he liked the lore of the most, and chose to give his all. Through a full month of work and 10 failed attempts, he had created what could only be called a masterpiece worthy of the title. It was truthfully her most cherished possession, and it hasn't left her side since she first got it. The two were absolutely awestruck as their eyes fell upon the beautiful portrait, then onto Issei, who was turning several shades of red, clearly not having been prepared for that moment, as he'd slightly back away, looking towards the ground. In his head, the true negativity he held was surfacing slowly. He expected some kind of insult, but that never came, and that nagging voice in the back of his head was pretty literally blasted away as the two let out an audible squeal of delight at the very thought of getting custom-made bakken. They were really goddamn expensive. This was followed by Kate's calling out as she ran up, gently holding his hands. "Really, new swords right before our tournament? This is the best day ever. And to have Diana's seal of approval?" To which Mura had let out a truly exasperated sigh. She knew what was going on but didn't feel like explaining it. Diana had personally paid for all of the highest-end equipment for her own club and handpicked everything, so the two knew she had a ridiculously good eye for quality. Kate's excitement was genuinely palpable. Within her bloodline there's a long passed-down legend of gifts of this nature being a sign from the gods of a positive fortune. This was far more towards the supernatural side of things, but she was taking it literally. To her, this was something that never had happened before a major event, and it made her feel like it was destiny of sorts. She sort of mumbled something just under her breath. We might actually win this year. As she managed to reel herself back down from that genuine euphoria, she would offer the boy a smile. Hey Issei? I know I can't quite speak for the whole kendo team, but you're invited to come watch us in the tournament, even if it's just to watch the two of us. I will personally beat them down if they try to put their hands or swords on you. It would mean the world to me if you came. The girl reached over into her purse, grabbing a pen and paper, quickly jotting down her number and Murayama's too, so he would be able to get in touch with the two of them. To her surprise, and more so Artemis, he gently teared the paper near the bottom, taking her pen, and he wrote down his own in some of the neatest handwriting she'd ever seen. He spoke softly. I wouldn't want you two to ignore the call thinking it's spam or something, so here. He'd hand her the slip as he'd carefully turn, heading to the front of the store, waving his hand behind him. He wasn't good at goodbyes, so this was the best he could offer them. Diana would bow to the two as she rose to her feet. We will be in Kyoto for the weekend. Issei wants to train so he will never get hurt like he did that day. I'm sure you'll be pretty impressed when he comes back. I'd recommend sparring with him before your tournament, as I know it'll be 2 weeks from then, right? As the leader of the archery club, she took the time to look into every other club's event schedule so her own hadn't overlapped. Her tone was sweet as she stared over at Issei. The boy is very broken. This is the first day I've seen him smiling and talking so sincerely with anyone besides us. So how do I say this? Thank you on a personal level. He needs good friends and a support network. I can't give you the full details, but he's been through a ton, as I'm sure you two could have guessed. I will be providing him with the best materials you'll ever get your hands on. So you two better win at that competition. Her last sentence was teasing as they witnessed the Queen of Ice herself stick her tongue out before chasing after the boy, causing the two to laugh sincerely. And, as the four made their way out of there, it definitely left the duo with a renewed energy. He came and left like a whirlwind, which amused them both to no end. The Pinkette seemed the happiest as she called to her friend. We have a long day of work ahead of us, but honestly, I've never felt more ready. There was a pensive stare on Issei as they walked to the next store. This was truly the leap Issei had taken with another group of people. More so literally than figuratively to a point, and it felt like a weight had come off his shoulders. It felt like Atlas himself was aiding the boy in his mind. A certain white cat could feel it too as she'd reach out, pulling him into a hug, whispering softly, "You did well, I am proud of you." Those words were exactly what he needed to hear in that moment too, as they'd all sit on a bench. The boy was crying into her shoulder, and for a change it was out of happiness. He couldn't form a word, not that he needed to, as they stayed there for a good 15 minutes. Artemis and Kuroka seemed to nod to each other, quickly disappearing, letting the two have their moment, as they'd get a majority of the checklist done. The boy and his white cat were waiting there for around an hour or two, as Koneko had convinced him to just snuggle with her for a while to calm his nerves entirely. Scene break time skip, the clothing store on the 3rd floor. The four had finally all met up at one of the very few supernatural stores in the building. Most people wouldn't dare enter it due to the ridiculous prices. The public was completely unsure of how the hell such a store managed to stay open. But that was all just a front. It was a shop ran by Penemu, the chief secretary of the Grigori, who waved over at Artemis, greeting an old friend clearly. "Welcome to my less than humble store." She'd chuckle as she carefully locked the door behind them, covering them with some blinds. Her wings quickly came into view as she'd audibly snap her fingers. A few other fallen angel appeared from the side rooms, quickly sizing them all up as she'd cock an eyebrow. "You called ahead, warned me to make the sizes larger than the boys by a good 6 or 2, mind explaining why?" To which the goddess simply replied, "The boy has insane potential physically as is and will be trained under Yasaka herself. I'm sure you know what that'll do. On top of that, he's a senjutsu user with unrivaled potential." Penemu personally took this as a challenge as her lips pursed. "So, starting about 5 foot 7 inches. If what you're saying is right, he'll be nearly 6 feet tall by the end of that. And this right here is why he was brought to this store instead of a typical clothing store." The woman had perception that rivaled the gods themselves when it came to her hobby, much to the amusement of the goddess of the hunt. The boy had no clue what was going on at all, and just awkwardly nodded along before saying, "Wait, I'm actually going to get taller? I can finally get to reach the top shelf." His tone was sarcastic with the most deadpan expression, and with that last bit, as Penumi honestly lost her shit at that remark, falling over wheezing. He struck her sense of humor in the best of ways in that moment, much to the dismay of the goddess of the hunt, who groaned out loud. There was a chittering of laughter from the two cat girls though, who were just bemused and amused in the same regard at this silly situation. Kuroka spoke up. Never a dull moment with Issei, eh? Artemis once more shot her the same look from breakfast, spelling out very slowly in a menacing voice. Gunjinar. Which quickly shut the black-haired cat up as she'd flee to a dressing room, leaving Shirin and Issei very confused. A good 40-ish minutes passed as the fallen angels would carefully map out things on some charts, sketching out things, and even prepared some temporary clothes for Issei to train in. They were much stronger than average clothes, as she seemed to speak happily. You sure have outright given me quite the challenge here, boy. If the clothes don't fit well once you finish training, be sure to come here, I'll alter them myself, okay? That is my guarantee to you. He wasn't too versed on any of this, so he just nodded as she pointed over to a small golden bell. If I'm not here when you arrive, just ring that. I'll drop what I'm doing and come help you as a one-time favor. You should be the only person able to lift it. He nodded, understanding the implications. And with that, their trip to the mall had completely wrapped up, and they would return to the mansion, gathering up the last bit of luggage they need to take. Around 1:30 p.m., the mansion once more. Issei and Artemis could be seen preparing to go visit her families. Forrest before the trip, standing in the center of a magic circle, clearly going to retrieve 2 pieces of wood perfect for the gifts he intended to make, alongside some scrap wood to practice before going into the final product. No room for error with materials this high quality after all. He basically will only have one shot at making both of them properly. The boy could be seen texting both Murayama and Kates for the details of their usual bakans, a very detailed list down to their center of balance, size, weight, curvature, and grip size, making sure to make everything as precise to what would be comfortable in their hands. As he finally got all of the measurements, he took the time to screenshot the texts and even pin them on his notepad app to make sure he didn't lose them. He was meticulous when it came to something he set his mind to, which was a horrifying thought if he really ever set his mind to revenge. Something that was a clear passing thought in Artemis' head watching this all unfold. She'd reach up and gently clap her hands against her cheeks to clear her mind of any thought like that though. So, have you thought about which color baken will go to which? Considering the woods we'll be using are so distinct. The goddess mused over to the boy as the teleport began to take place. She asked this knowing Kuroka was listening in from the stairs like a gossip munder, and quite comically as he went to answer, the teleport went off, cutting his words off, leading to one very angry black cat. Though they couldn't hear it, Artemis could feel it in a weird sense as Kuroka yelled, "This is bullshit!" at the top of her lungs back in the mansion, alarming both the maids and Koneko, though her sister assumed she was just playing a game or something. Around 1:35 p.m., the storage shed in Artemis Woods. As the finished stepping through the portal and into the woods, Issei's senses were immediately hit with one simple sense. Serenity, unlike anything he'd ever felt before, as he walked forward, slowly spinning on one heel with his jaw dropped, staring at towering trees taller than anything he'd ever witnessed before and animals he couldn't have ever imagined. In the first branch he spotted a family of small glittering silver squirrels that turned pitch black, blending into the shadows of the tree branch, as he set his eyes upon them, damn near making him question if he really saw them in the first place. He took a few moments to process everything above him as his eyes fell to the forest floor, searching it only to spot flowers more vibrant and beautiful than any he'd ever seen before, more curious how light reached down to them through the leaves that formed the sky all their own more than anything else. His very own goddess was delighted, seeing how entranced he was by her forest she cultivated by hand. As she gave him ample time to truly draw it all in, her voice rang out to bring him back down to earth and into focus. "My question can wait until you truly see the materials. If this sight was enough to get your motivation and inspiration going, I feel your grandfather's influence and will is going to run wild once you actually get your hands on the materials you'll be using." She chuckled to herself, clearly amused at how he'll react to new things in the future. He truly was an innocent, bright-eyed boy when it came to exploration, just like his grandfather before him, it seemed. To which he simply nodded, reaching out gently, holding her hand to follow her. He was in too much awe of his surroundings to trust his own footsteps currently, and he felt her grip his hand tightly with a giggle. My, still so distracted you don't even trust yourself to walk?" She'd call over to him, to which he just slowly nodded, watching various birds and even a snake fly by. Much to his surprise, it had passed right before his very eyes, even stopping to hover in front of him with its tongue flicking out a time or two before the goddess shooed it away. "The animals here are only really used to my presence, so they're pretty curious now that I brought a mortal they can sense here, I suppose." She'd muse out loud as she finally began opening the door, stepping forth into a building that was far more grandiose on the inside than the out, once more completely blowing away any expectations the boy had of how the world worked, as he often did to others. He was like a kid in the world's biggest candy store, if you could consider artisanal supplies candy, to a craftsman skittering around from point A to B to C to D, and so forth, just inspecting everything with the knowledge and respect not to directly pick things up. It was moments like this where Artemis would damn near forget how much was going on in his head towards negativity, and evoke feelings of regret in a way. How joyous it would have been to have taken him away when he was younger, to protect that delightful innocence in a way. Regrettably, she couldn't do it due to stipulations of the gods and supernatural, as stupid as that is to her, which lead to her letting out a deep sigh. The boy had mistaken her sigh for impatience, and straightened himself up, returning to her side only to receive a small pat on the head with the kindest of gaze as she spoke up on her true feelings for once. "When you were younger, I wish I could have brought you and your grandfather here. Even if it were just once." In the corner of the room he could see a massive picture of both a younger boy with brighter eyes than he had now and an old man with a bow across his back. The goddess had clearly taken the photo and kept it, wanting to give him it at a later time in life. Something that had alerted Artemis was the fact time stopped the moment he set his eyes upon it, as if Cronus himself had descended upon the building. There was a moment of silence as he slowly walked up and fell to his knees, weeping uncontrollably, simply awestruck by the sight of his grandpa's smiling face once more. And something happened that not even Artemis herself could have imagined in that moment. The man himself appeared behind Issei, hugging him so tight that the boy could barely breathe as his voice rang out. "Hello, my boy, it's been a long time, hasn't it?" A clear golden halo could be seen above his head, and a woman was standing beside Artemis now with the deepest gold hair, a beauty unlike any other, and a bitter smile etched into her visage as a hand was placed upon the goddess's shoulder. "I'm probably breaking a few rules by letting this happen, and I'm sure Father Time is going to rip me a new one. But I would fall if I were to not allow this, honestly. The boy needs it regardless of the joy he's shown the past few days. He's a ticking time bomb in the worst of ways and far too good at hiding it. I too have been watching over him. Though with a different reason, I suppose." Gabriel herself would speak to her longtime friend, watching the scene unfold, clearly hinting at knowing Artemis liked him, causing a damn near nuclear blush as Issei had turned to see his gramps smiling at him. The weight of years upon years of pain and agony all came crashing in at once, completely shattering what mask he held onto at all times, and he clung to the old man, screaming and crying in sheer disbelief. If this were a dream, he never wanted to wake up from this very moment, and the old man could physically feel all the sadness, anger, confusion, and just sheer pain in full force, causing his wings to flicker for a moment or two due to hearing the boy slowly pouring his heart out over everything that has happened, at how much he missed the old man, and how he's done everything in his power to honor the legacy he left to him. What Issei wouldn't know was that it happened because the old man was so pissed at his own son for allowing things to get this far, he genuinely considered murder for a moment. A sight that shocked the elder seraph and even Artemis to no end, as this was the kindest man they'd ever met. But, as they say, even roses have thorns. The kindest people are fucking terrifying once you give them a reason to be. Instead of showing that anger, the hostility he felt, he only showed compassion and understanding, pulling the boy down into him for the tightest a hug, further showing where Issei's boundless kindness originated from. The old man would carefully bring the much older Issei up onto his shoulders, as he did when the boy was still young, and carried him over to a forging station, clearly letting him watch from atop his shoulders as he'd slowly work, clearly beginning to create a custom set of tools for the boy. It would be his last gift he could deliver in the time that Gabriel had managed to allow for him after all. The whole time, he talked with the boy, reminiscing of better times, getting to know about his new girlfriend, getting to know of how things have began to change for the better, as Issei slowly prattled on between bits of listening and talking. All the while Artemis and Gabriel were catching up over some tea, not seeming to mind this in the slightest, even snapping a few pictures here and there throughout the entire time of Issei's smile rather than the moments he would frown or look sad. They wanted to create a picture book solely of memories of this day for the boy, to remind him that even if the world is bleak, he still has the love of his grandfather and many of those around him. Once more Artemis would get to bear witness to a brilliant sight. To say Issei's grandfather was a master craftsman wouldn't do it justice in any sense of the word. It was like his discerning eye was perfectly picking out the best of the best, utilizing every last drop of the materials on hand with little to no waste. It was a sight to behold, and a very hands-on, intimate lesson for Issei for his coming project. Even up in heaven, the old man never stopped honing his craft, as he had risen amongst the ranks, becoming a head crafter for almost any amenity or custom item someone wanted up there. Sure, they could use magic to craft things, but there was a certain genuine authenticity to handmade products no one could deny, not even the gods. Issei was like a sponge absorbing every detail, every motion. Every strike of the hammer against heated metals, watching like a man possessed but smiling the most sincere a smile, getting to spend time with his grandfather once more. This truly had become the best day of his life, even if he realized in his heart it would be a short-lived venture. The boy was bright enough to realize it couldn't last forever, so he was cherishing every moment and etching it to his very memory. Though, he'd probably later ask a favor of the angels to get in touch with his grandfather every so often if it were at all possible. Within hours, with the assistance of magic that he took the time to teach Issei step by step, he had began to assemble the most beautiful set of tools for the boy to continue his craft. Along with the basic magic used in crafting, he taught him how to freely use multiple tools hands-free with ki rather than just magic to increase the efficiency and accuracy. Not that any onlookers would realize just what he was doing, as he was subtle as can be. Beyond that, he would slip a small notebook into Issei's pocket just out of sight with a shushing motion. It was a grimoire that only the two of them could read, but the brown-haired boy won't find that out till later. The goddess watching had clearly missed the hidden transaction, while they too had the softest to look to her eyes with a gentle smile as she watched the interaction between the two, thinking it was just innocent. Words couldn't explain how much Artemis felt she owed Gabriel for this surprise visit. "Thank you, my dearest friend. This is a gift he'll never forget, genuinely." Those words were spoken softly enough that only the two women could hear the exchange, as the seraph would shrug softly, only replying, "He has harsh trials and tribulations ahead of him. The least I can do is give him a blessed memory to fall back on and try to convince my brother to allow them to converse time to time." She had already thought way ahead of what Issei would ask. Sure, it violated many rules of heaven, but at this point, who really cared? They couldn't just leave the boy without hope. What had started out as a small side trip to go gather up some materials certainly turned into a literal day that could last a lifetime, so to speak. Over 24 hours had sincerely passed straight watching his grandfather work. Due to the nature of the spell stopping time around them, no one would grow hungry, thirsty, or feel a need to use the bathroom. Thankfully, the angel had truly thought of everything, it seemed. This was also how she circumvented the rule of angels below seraphs leaving heaven without permission. Because technically they never left while time was still moving and would be back before time unfroze. Gotta love loopholes. Sadly, all good things must come to an end as they were getting close to the deadline of the spell. Gramps did one special little bit that no one would catch, as he'd inscribe an insignia into the wood carving knife at the very base of the blade with a forging hammer, driving it in as if he were punching a pin into the knife, as he'd motion a hush with one finger, giving Issei a wink. It was clearly one last hurrah from the old man to get back at the rules which prevented him from seeing his grandson. In his years in heaven he learned many a thing. This one in particular was a closed-state sigil that would link from point A to B without being able to be detected, just in case his grandson ever wanted advice while crafting. This was of course a last resort should the angels deny him the right to talk anyway. He truly was a crafty old fox. A fun thing to note, which none of the three, being Gabriel, his grandfather, and Artemis, would realize until later, was they all had a similar backup plan to get the two in touch. Issei had more or less keyed into the fact that time was running short as his grandpa got up and walked over to the very unique red and blue pieces of wood, respectively, lifting them up, carefully inspecting the rings and grain of the wood, checking out any flaws which he couldn't find any, thankfully, and then began actively jotting down some notes for his grandson to read over before working with the wood itself. Advice not even Artemis herself could imagine the effectiveness of. He was actively sketching out various runes, sigils, and many other small spells and tricks to help ensure the perfect gift for the kendo duo. After he finished up his notes, he'd cast a special spell on the tools of his own design. It bound them to Issei's very soul so that no one could take them away from him, as he personally bagged up the wood using the specialized storage pouch he had created. It was quite literally a inventory, as his grandson always talked about in games, with a small user interface that would appear in front of it to allow crafting, cooking, and various other actions hand-tailored specifically to his grandson's mana. This, alongside the tools, were his final physical gift for now, and possibly ever, to the boy, as he'd lift Issei up into his arms, simply saying one phrase. "I could never be more proud of how strong and resilient you are. You have a heart of gold, even if it's in shattered bits. Forge it into an unbreakable tool. I am so glad to have helped raise you, my boy. My dearest Issei. Never forget that." There was a brief pause between the two as Issei took the bag and gently set it aside as he began to speak. "Gramps, what do I do?" I'm fucking horrified of the monster I know I could become. How do I hold back such violent and vulgar thoughts? I know you've probably heard by now about me almost taking my own life. But I can't hide this from you if no one else. And Artemis, I'm sorry, as I know this is going to really hurt to hear. But I need to say it. Wouldn't it just be better if I were to die? There's a serious chance I become a sincere threat to the world. This may just be a fleeting thought to most, but it's a serious concern for me. It's not like I want to die. Koneko would drag me back and kill me a second time if I did so pointlessly, but just how do I live through this pressure? You're the only person I can ask, as you're the strongest person I've ever known. The boy's voice was breaking as he broke down crying as he screamed that out. Sure, he wanted this to be a happy goodbye, but more than anything in the world he needed some form of closure currently. There was a moment both Juzo Haidu and Gabriel's wings flickered black. That scream nearly broke both of them, and Artemis outright began weeping, unabashed at the sight of the boy without his mask. At his most vulnerable before the one man who could bring him out of his shell. His grandfather slowly pulled him down against his figure once more in the world's tightest a hug, letting him let it all out silently, at first just stroking his brown mop of hair, as he'd let out a soft sigh, clearly having taken time to think his words over carefully. He spoke words that were harsh but honest. Damn near unbefitting an angel, damn near screaming due to his own frustration at times. His expression was not that of an angel but a father who was experiencing the worst wrath of his life, his wings rapidly flickering over and over as he spoke, trying his best to contain himself. If you need to become a monster to protect those you love, become a monster God himself would fear. If you need to become ruthless to save a life, become the devil himself. If you need to let your pain flow freely to those who wronged you, become a torrent so strong that not even Athena's aegis could stop your misery. There was another pause as he regained his composure to continue speaking, seeing that Issei was listening wide-eyed from hearing his grandpa yell for the second time in his life. He could tell this was coming from his very heart and soul, so he stifled his own cries so he could hold on to every word as if it were gospel itself. And as the old man's voice softened, he would flash the soft smile down to him. But my boy, never forget that kind and gentle heart of yours. Never let that fire burn out, or your love for crafting, let alone other beings. You have been through more than any man should ever have to bear. Your trauma is no less heavy than the weight Atlas himself carried upon his shoulders. Of that I'm sure even the Titan himself would vouch for you. You are, how do I put it best? There was another brief pause as he'd stifle a cry, trying to hold himself together. His words were genuine and radiating a warmth even angels couldn't replicate on a good day. You truly are my pride. My joy. The one who I raised the best. I cannot apologize enough for how my son, your father Gora, has treated you, and I cannot blame you should you eventually give up our last name in favor for your spouse. No one could blame you for that, as you deserve far better. You, my son, have probably the most tenacious heart of all, because while you say I'm the strongest, I don't think I could even remotely bear what transgressions you've gone through. You are far stronger, far more resilient and brave a man than I could ever pray to be, and I am so proud to call you my very own legacy. I do not know the exact words to help you through this, nor do I think even God himself would without saying that lightly. But I can see amazing things ahead of you. And no matter what, to me, you will always be my son. And I can promise you one thing and one thing alone. This world is not prepared for the return of the King of the Wind. There is no one more befitting to that title than you, my boy. Take care of the mad goddess, you hear? With that last bit, he would give a truly Cheshire grin that hinted at the fact his grandfather knew far more about the supernatural than he'd ever let on, shocking everyone listening. The old fox gave him a wink before teleporting back to heaven in what looked like a mist of blue fire, a teleport unique solely to his magic that he created in life. To say he was full of surprises wouldn't do it justice. Artemis' jaw hit the floor seeing that, and Gabriel just slowly began to blink before they both said one word, simply screaming, "What?" And Issei just began to laugh, simply mumbling, "I always knew he was special. Never expected that though." As he mumbled that, he'd slipped the book from his pocket into the bag, knowing no one else could access it, and it would be safe from prying eyes there. He'd been warned many times by Kuroka and Shirin that the supernatural was a dangerous place, and while he trusted his grandfather and Artemis, angels weren't exactly on his radar yet, regardless of how holy a being that they may be praised as. With a truly flabbergasted stare, Gabriel would take a small bow to Issei, then wave to Artemis, still too shocked to speak, as she teleported back to heaven, and time itself would seem to unfreeze. The goddess of the hunt was still standing there dazed as she'd slap her own cheeks before saying, "Okay, that happened, shall we head back to the mansion? We do need to go rally up and catch the train." This was supposed to be a 30-minute visit which turned into rough a day and 6 hours. "But honestly I feel you need it today, yeah?" To which Issei walked up and hugged her tighter than he knew he could. It was a bear hug of a lifetime as he thanked her profusely over and over. A single thought played in her head. Shirin is gonna kill me when she smells him on me, fuck. Not realizing the white Nekisha would be relatively okay with it. Around 1:38 p.m., back at the mansion. As they'd finally returned back to the mansion, everyone but Shirin was already completely prepared, so a particular black cat was lurking in the shadows of the usual transport room and pounced Issei the moment he came through the portal for the fun of it, scaring the absolute hell out of the poor boy as she pinned him down, sniffing at him. She swiftly got up and began sniffing at Artemis before she just whistled. "But Hushiroani is gone, Naya beat your asses." She was clearly just fucking with both of them with her usual trademark catty shenanigans, but the duo turned scarlet red, sputtering out an explanation as the white cat girl came in, looking at them both with a cocked eyebrow before she walked up to Artemis and patted her head. "If it's you, I told you beforehand, it is fine," was all the girl would say before she walked up and hugged her mate, giving him a simple, "Welcome home, my prince. Did you get what you needed? You seem a lot happier, but it looks like you've been crying. What happened?" To which Artemis just handed them a small crystal that would show the entire recorded events from earlier. Both of the Nekisha would walk up and just hug Issei as tight as they could. Kuroka dropped her usual antics and spoke in a soft tone. "It is good you got to see him again." And her sister chimed in a soft yet loving tone. "He's right. Should you need to snap, should you need to let it all out, Raj, beyond the concept of wrath, you'll have the three of us here to clean up the aftermath." For the first time since his grandfather died, he had actually found a true home, and he knew it in his heart now. A reassurance he needed now more than ever as he straight up pulled the three gals down into a very large group hug, whispering, "I adore all of you. I don't think I could imagine things without you. If you told me a year ago my life would be like this, I'd call God himself a liar. But I can't be any more thankful to have all of you. Thank you for accepting me, flaws and all. Even if I openly hide behind a mask." He'd whisper that last bit low enough that they'd barely hear it. And that group hug tightened up on every front. A true hodgepodge of a group, yet we are growing closer bit by bit. "I could get used to this," was the only thought that played through Artemis' mind. That's it, guys. That was the full stuff. Until the author add more chapters. Take care.